So next we have Sophie Strand. Welcome, Sophie. She is a poet and eco-spiritual contemplativist. I love that word. And the title of her talk today is Poetics and the Magdalene, News from Nowhere. Great. Oh
no, it's not, and that is not the title.
That's the old one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
I have the old list up here. I'm sorry. So
okay.
please tell us the name of your presentation today.
I believe it's Rewilding the Magdalene, ecological embodiment. And I forget. I had sent you something, but thank you. Yeah, I'm a poet. And I'm a fiction writer. I've written a lot about the Magdalene. I've written a book about her that's historical fiction that will be coming out this spring. And I also write a lot about rewilding the Gospels with ecology and modern anthropology. So trying to compost older traditions so that they fruit something new. So that's kind of the context of where I am coming from, not as a spiritual teacher, but as a storyteller, which is kind of what Yeshua was. He was a storyteller. Okay, so this is about, I'm entering in through the senses and through the body. So it's interesting that we kind of take that question about enlightenment and embodiment and problematize it a little bit before coming in here. I'm personally of the belief that you have to have both, and it's like a cycle, that you have to have seasons of ascent, seasons of descent, and that the two, you know, sometimes it's springtime and things need to ascend out of the ground, and sometimes they need to rot back into the ground and into their bodies. So yes, I like the fusion and the integration of the two. Okay, so Mary Magdalene, apostle of the apostles, companion of Christ, who he loved better than the others, according to the Gospel of Philip, and kisses on the mouth. The first at the tomb to witness the miracle of resurrection. Just as Jesus' body disappears out of the tomb, out of Scripture, interrupting a many millennia long Mediterranean tradition of vegetal gods that have had their bodies literally mulched back into the kingdom. So does the Magdalene disappear from Scripture, from Christianity, and from her role as the lover and perhaps the spiritual equal of the man called Yeshua. Jesus' lover disappears and his body disappears. All we are left with is abstraction and ascension narratives remarkably incompatible with our cyclical, soil-fed, embodied, ecologically contextual existence. How did a nature-based storyteller with a love of good food, decentralized healing communities, and magic become the figurehead of extractive capitalism, ecocide, and oppression? Like plants wither when they are uprooted from their mycorrhizal, soil-bound existence, I think when we uprooted Yeshua from his Galilean ecology and context, from his native tongue of Aramaic and his Judaism, his story was easily reappropriated by the very empire that had murdered him. But who was he uprooted from? I would say he was uprooted from both his landscape, his body, and his lover, his counterpart, the Magdalene. Miriam Magdalene, Miriam the Tower, has been kept as a secret in folklore, in animist traditions, oral traditions, and the breath and bodies of those who, devoted to her over centuries, were actively persecuted and obliterated. Christianity has been the unfortunate vehicle for Neoplatonist dualisms, that bifurcation between mind and matter, messy life, and abstract morality made possible by the transition into alphabetic writing. Socrates' shadow world of illusions and abstracted ideal forms are rearticulated as the world of spirit and the world of matter in both early Romanized Christianity and Gnosticism. The words of an oral storyteller are written down, enshrined in the language of his oppressor. Originally, for most of human history, scripture and myth were oral, perceived as ephemeral, evanescent events carried by breath and only ever living in relational, interstitial life worlds. Sacred words were summoned and freshly adapted by a unique combination of bodies, environment, audience, and storyteller. Sacred teachings lived on the vibrating thread of relationality that connected people to other people and to communities, to the social and environmental ecologies within which they were embedded. Sound, unlike sight, which is what we utilize when we read, interiorizes. Sound brings the interior breath, what Jesus would have called the ruach, or spirit, shaped by the instrument of a body, into the physical seashell curvature of another body. Sounds all bear the residue of the interior structure that produce them. They manifest human beings to each other as conscious interiors. Sound affirms the reality of another being's interior experience, the shape and texture of it. Thus, it tends to create tight-knit communities. Jesus told stories to groups of people who interrupted him and asked questions. His main teaching was less the substance of his teachings and more the medium itself. Gather, interrupt each other, share food, share breath with those you heal, and tell stories about embodied, ecologically situated existence. Tell stories about mustard seeds, birds, fig trees, and the people and agricultural practices that actually wove together your web of kin. As we write down the words of people who mainly taught in breath, we forget that teachings are relational events, and a written word on a page gives us the incorrect ability to believe that spiritual teachings are stable objects that can exist outside of relationship with no need for bodies or updating or breath. The Hebrew debar, which means word, means also event, and thus refers to the spoken word. The spoken word is always happening, a verb, a movement in time, completely lacking in the thing-like repose of the written or printed word. In Trinitarian theology, the second person of the Godhead is the spoken word, which is important to remember. How then do we tie Jesus back into the oral storytelling embodied world of breath within which he was actually teaching? I think the missing breath sucked out of the written scriptures, the spoken debar, is the Magdalene, and her association with a healing sensuality, with unguents, with oil, with tears, with blood, with illness, as implied by her healing of 7 devils. So I want to start with the parts that have been removed from sterile scripture, the senses. In a recent article titled "What the Nose Knows," published in the Harvard Gazette, researchers explain how more and more it is becoming clear memory and smell are intimately connected. Not only that, but smell and color are synesthetically connected. For example, many people unconsciously associate citrus scents and yellow and green. Diane Ackerman writes memorably in her incredible book, A Brief History of the Senses, "Our sense of smell can be extraordinarily precise, yet it's almost impossible to describe how something smells to someone who hasn't smelled it. We see only where there is light enough, taste only when we put things into our mouths, touch only when we make contact with someone or something, hear only sounds that are loud enough to hear. But we smell always and with every breath. Cover your eyes and you will stop seeing. Cover your ears and you will stop hearing. But if you cover your nose and stop smelling, you will die. Smell, as carried by breath, has always been deeply important to me. Petrichor, one of my favorite words, is the almost bodily smell the earth gives off when it is hit by rain. I'm blessed or cursed with a sensitive nose that alerts me to molds and synthetic materials when other people are blissfully nose blind. So when I began work on my historical fiction retelling of Miriam the Magdalene story, set in Second Temple period Palestine, I knew that the best way I could create the scaffolding of an embodied, textured world was through smell, and there was no better time period to have picked. The Old and New Testament are full of oils and unguents and anointings. Jesus and his followers walked through fields of wild flowers. The Holy Temple, a constant incineration of incense and animal sacrifices, would perhaps arrive as a scent memory, before you brought back the bustle, the song of pilgrims, the arguments of scholars, the dry, mealy smell of show cakes made from wheat and incense would arrive. The tangy brine of spilled blood, the blue-black of smoke thick with herbs, the cheesy bite of sweat-stained, dust-caked travelers recently washed in the nearby baths, the sour ammonia desperation of the sick come for healing. Let me offer some embodied sweetness. This was a time when both men and women wore perfume. Let me paint you a scripture with smell. First, step inside the courtyard of a wealthy home in Bethany. Someone is cooking over a fire. Cinnamon bursts like stars in the air. Clove, the crack and sparkle of dried rosemary. Prick of pepper, ginger, sweet cassia, spit of fat as someone turns a lamb joint over the flames. You can smell the olive oil in the lamps that have just been lit, warm and slightly rancid, yet comforting. The odor of intimacy drawing close to the flame-emblazoned silhouette of someone in the hazy blue of the spring twilight. The almond trees are greening, flowering. The smell is tart and high. It keeps the night fresh, even when the vegetable soup, spiced with saffron and onion, wafts to you in humid bursts. Someone has just mixed the wine, a rosy, floral aroma. It's Cypriot wine. A visiting traveler has brought this treat from his travels. You can smell the traveler too. He smells like a tree, which is the most fashionable perfume at the time. Balsam, pine, galbanum. But he has also brought his wares with him. Gifts of lily and rose oil for your mother, frankincense for your father. He unstoppers a small jar and lets out an almost bodily perfume that causes you to recoil. It's the smell of an armpit, a root wrenched from wet earth. Spikenard, he tells you, the oil used to anoint kings, the oil used to mark the dead. Later, you will show this strange man the garden behind your home. As he walks, you can smell beeswax on his hands, the gum resin of incense uncurling from his close-cropped curls. The starlight softly pries open and releases the dry, tender smell of roses that grow on a trellis near the gate to the street. Aromatic apricots and pomegranates will soon blush into being. But tonight is early in the season. The lilies and violets are slender, inquisitive additions to the dominant smell, which is that of the soil, exposed by newly surfaced olive tree roots, intimate and tender as the smell of a birthing room. You attended the birth of your sister's child this past winter and will never forget the intense earthy funk of the room after the child slid from her body. But forget these memories, something else dominates, that ineffable perfume that is a combination of your own sweat and someone else's. Cut cedar, split figs, the spice-sweetened breath of someone else leaning close to you. The man has stopped, a hand at your shoulder. He is gazing at you solemnly. Your love is sweeter than wine. The smell of your perfume is more fragrant than spices. You will not easily recall the day, the face of your mother and father, the taste of the food from the meal. You will not even immediately recall the first time you truly saw him. Blue in the gloaming, the whites of his eyes silver, the curl of his grin and his handsome face like smoke against smoke. But years later, walking through a distant marketplace, you will catch a whiff of something. Spikenard lily, springtime from a country that no longer exists, and you will remember it all. My beloved spoke and said to me, "Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me, see. The winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth, the season of singing has come, the cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me." This quote and this sensory worlding were the actual scriptural context that Jesus consciously planted himself inside of. Bridegroom is one of Jesus' most popular epithets, appearing more than 15 times across the New Testament and countless others in the Gnostic and apocryphal texts. Romanized Christianity, an invention out of pace with the Galilean magician by over 100 years, misinterprets the bridegroom as the companion of the church. But the Jewish people of Judea and Galilee would have had a very different resonance when Jesus called himself the bridegroom. They would have immediately thought of the bridegroom of the Song of Songs, and then they would have wondered where the bride was. When was the wedding? The Song of Songs stands out as a sensual fireworks show in the Jewish scriptures. It has no truck with morality or law. It makes no great spiritual claims. The canticle subject is love, impatient, embodied, erotic love between a bridegroom and a bride. Composed orally around the 6th century BCE, the text is a green field, a practical Eden dripping with honey, an eroticism so thick and unruly it bursts open and outruns every metaphor employed by the author. My beloved is a fawn. My beloved is a dove, a daffodil. My beloved is like pomegranates. Your hair is a flock of goats. No one metaphor is enough to encompass the desire for the beloved. The metaphors tumble forward so fast that the effect is less of poetry and more of landscape streaming past on a drive through the countryside. Bodies preoccupy the text, as does bodily desire. Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely. Thy temples are like a piece of a pomegranate within thy locks. Thy neck is like the Tower of David, built for an armory. Love becomes wine, it becomes honey, then milk, then perfume. In an alchemical process so fluid we feel ourselves poured through the language into a love that is no longer bounded by the human. The bridegroom and bride open to a world that is actively opening to them. This, I feel, is the realm described by Professor of Gender Studies Mel E. Chen in their book Animacies. This animacy, Chen tells us, activates new theoretical formations that trouble and undo stubborn binary systems of difference, including dynamism stasis, life-death, subject-object, speech, non-speech. Animacy has the capacity to rewrite conditions of intimacy. The landscape that the lovers of the Song of Songs inhabit is not a setting, it is a consanguinity, a participatory relationship that provides them with the language of love. It seems to actually body them. The bridegroom and the bride are less discrete individuals than they are holobients, assemblages of relationships that constitute a greater whole, cedars and daffodils and foxes and pomegranates. No surprise then that the author never seeks to differentiate between voices. Sometimes we clearly hear the bride, other times the bridegroom, and once the brothers of the bride speak. Take us, the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes, we are told later in the canticle. Who are the foxes? Does it even matter? They surface from the animacy and then dive back in, demonstrating that what matters is less character and more aliveness. Love making in animals, beloved so blended, they remind me of the origin of our very complex cells. As evolutionary biologist Lynn Margolis showed us, evolution is not always linear. Major evolutionary events have been made possible not through a slow, steady trudge upward, but through unpredictable partnerships and horizontal fusion of genes. It is through these complex relationships that we came into being.
Sophie, you're muted.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Sorry about
It is through these complex relationships that our multicellular bodies are built. What if we didn't need to enter into a sacred marriage? What if we already were one? Right down to the cells in a flake of dried skin, lovemaking in every vibrating part. The Song of Songs offers us an alternative way of looking at the Magdalene and Jesus. This is not the sexless, starved bridegroom of Christ's church, denied his wife, his life, his funk, and pheromones. This is the man so consumed with love that he slips loose his edges and becomes every blade of grass. This is a bridegroom so rooted in his body and the body of his lover that he can't help but root down further into the teeming animacy of the sensual world of Galilee. Both bride and bridegroom mutually build each other from everything available. Each metaphor builds a lover by breaking down the human, erasing a cheek with a pomegranate, a pair of lips with lilies. Their love is a participatory, interwoven ecology. This is a cosmogony as much as it is a love poem. Every drop of spikenard oil, every feather of the rock doves builds a world. Let us give Jesus back his body and his Magdalene. Let us remember a Yeshua who knew the dense, vine-entangled love he was summoning when he called himself the bridegroom. Jesus knew it was the holiest title of all and the one that tied him practically to a very real woman. This is a man aware that courtship with the lover is really courtship with the whole ecstatic, perfumed, chaotic landscape. This is a couple more lycanized than lovers, who told stories about mustard seeds and lilies, who slept on the ground in the open air under the sky in Galilee. So, yeah, that's my offering. Thank you, everyone.
Gosh, thank you so much, Sophie. That was absolutely awesome. I'm a poet too, so I honor what you're doing there. Thank you. And a storyteller. I can see from the comments in chat, people loved it and they were taken back. You brought some tears to my eyes, because some of the deepest memories we have, possibly even past life memories, are around smell. And of course, you know, Proust wrote his great novel based on this, the triggering of memories by smell and so on. So it felt like you summarized the Proust version of the Yeshua and Mary Magdalene story in just like a few moments. Bless you. I'm sure there's lots of questions for Sophie. Put your hand up if you've got one.
Thomas.
Yeah, Anna.
Thomas, I know this is a little backwards, but I wanted to reread Sophie's bio.
Oh, it's okay. I'm fine. I think
But
Okay.
there's I want to mention your book in there, because you have your book mentioned too. So I'd like to do that really quickly. So as we just saw, she's a writer from the Hudson Valley who focuses on the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology, and who did it so brilliantly. Her first book of essays, The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine, will be published by Inner Traditions in fall 2022. Congratulations. And is now available for pre-order. Her eco-feminist historical fiction, Reimagining of the Gospels, The Madonna Secret, will also be published by Inner Traditions in spring 2023. Looking forward to those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalisa.
Could you tell us about the Rewilding of the Gospels, the one that's coming out in 23? Give us a sneaky preview of that. Are you taking the story and putting it into poetry, or what?
Well, I love historical fiction. I was very inspired by The Red Tent, and also the work of Mary Renaud with Greek myths, and trying to actually combine them with a lot of the anthropological historical research to give them a lot of texture. And so I've always thought, what would it be like to look at the story of Jesus, but from a very, very textured perspective? Like enter in from the side, so that by the time he arrives, you're like, who is this person again? Because there's so many different relationships that make it. I wanted to create an ecosystem. It's not just about, of course I wanted to honor the voices of the women who were forgotten, Salome, Miriam, Jesus' mother, all of these different characters, but I also wanted to honor the plants and the animals, the customs, the rituals, the smells, so that by the time you meet Jesus, he's contextualized. So it's a story, and it doesn't purport to be the truth. And I think that's why fiction and storytelling is, you know, Jesus told stories to teach. He told stories that use natural metaphors. So this really tries to honor that tradition and bring back to life the nature metaphors that he relied on so heavily. So, yeah.
Sounds wonderful, yeah. I don't know if you know, when I went to Galilee, I discovered a book called The Fifth Gospel, written by a Benedictine monk, I think, who'd lived in Galilee for 20 years. And he trudged all over the landscape. And there is a tradition in the church that the landscape is the fifth gospel.
Huh.
Did you know that?
I did not, and I love that so much.
I'll send you the details by email.
Please do.
It is an official teaching of the church that the landscape is the fifth gospel. It provides the context of all the other four gospels. Or now I would say the six gospels. I'd include Thomas and Mary Magdalene as part of it. But
yeah.
So you're reviving what is forgotten knowledge. Thank you so much. Anyone else want to take a dive into Sophie's mind here? She's a vibrant wisdom worker, you can tell. I think you made them all speechless.
Well, thank you everyone for letting me try and do that brief summoning. Thank you everyone. I'm going to go burn some spikenard actually. Someone was very generous to grow it and weave it into little incense for me. Thank you.
Sure. Well, we've still got a couple of minutes. Don't go yet. Have you got any poems you can read for us? Because
yeah.
we'd love to hear a poem of yours, you know.
Let me read one of my Magdalene poems.
We'd love that, because I'm a great poet and I run the Order of Peace Poets. So, smuggle poetry in wherever possible.
Let's see. Here. 1 second. Just have to pull it up. Here we are. It's called Miriam Remembers the Kingdom. When I find it.
Great.
Okay, here we are. Miriam Remembers the Kingdom. Here is a green hill where no one bleeds, a mustard seed to suck on, to keep as a secret below your tongue. Here is dove song, pure and blue as a cooled stone at the river's edge, a sycamore fig with the imprint of a large hand in the dust at the foot of its trunk. For his hands were large and hairy. He laughed so loudly it scared the swallows from the branch above his head, and wine. When there was wine, he drank it, undressed, ran like a leopard through the moonlight-striped Galilean hillside. Did you know there was a small white scar at the corner of his mouth? Yellow speckles like flower petals spreading from the center of his black-brown eyes. Do you celebrate his death? I would rather him alive. Do you tell his teachings? I would prefer his body, not bread and wine, not blood, but the man himself, twigs in his curly hair, nose crooked from the time his brother Jacob slugged him, arms strong from carrying heavy cedar beams across town. My love, let me return to the moment before the sun rises on that last day. Let me pretend for 1 more hour that the kingdom of your body is whole and unharmed, belongs only to me.
I love it. Okay, any other questions or comments? Can I just ask you a question, Sophie, because your work is so beautiful. Did you tell me about your academic path? Did you study creative writing at Harvard, or what? How did you get to do what you're doing?
I was raised by parents who are writers and who studied the history of religion, in particular Christianity. And I also, part of my family are Israeli Jews. So I also spent a lot of time in Israel. So it's an interesting compost heap. I was raised around rabbis and theologians and monks. And I studied creative writing at Bard College, but I also studied with Bruce Chilton. And who was, and so I had a lot of different things that were added onto the compost heap of me. But I love academic writing, but I also think that sometimes the best way into places where we don't have all the information is fiction, because then you're not saying, that's my way of saying that, like, your story is probably just as true as mine. I'm making no claims to the truth, but I do try and honor this with imagination. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, Bruce Chilton spoke at our first founding conference. He came here to France because he spends the summers in Paris. For those that don't know him, he's written a biography of Mary Magdalene.
He is. I actually don't love that one, but I love his book, Rabbi Yeshua, or Rabbi Jesus. I thought that one was really extraordinary.
I haven't read that one, but it's on my to-do list. And Rabbi Neusner used to teach at
Yes, I wasn't there when he was there, but I've read everything by him. And
he's one of the most learned Jewish philosophers, historians, intellectual, cultural figures. I wish he was still alive. We could get him to talk about Mary Magdalene.
His book, The Rabbi Talks with Jesus, is an incredible book. I really recommend it.
Right. I'll make a note of that. Yeah. So that's really exciting. So Bard has got quite an important cultural impact and that's why you've ended up in that same area, around the Hudson area. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Brilliant. Do you know much about the Dutch culture? Have you got any Dutch roots going back?
I don't. I know a lot about the violence the Dutch did here.
Violence.
Oh yeah, they genocidally massacred the Mansi-Lenape people. So I know quite a bit about that, but that's my context. It's been trying to unpack a lot of the things that have been written out of the history books in the Hudson Valley. Pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, sure, interesting. I mean, I have a love-hate thing going with Holland.
Yeah.
You know, I love some of what they did, Spinoza and all that.
Yeah, I love Spinoza too. Yeah.
But you know, they were also genocidal against. I mean, they were stuck in that biblical literalism, unfortunately, through Calvin, and they, you know, they sort of didn't quite get to where we need to be going. But I think now they are. And Nina van der Meer, I don't know if you heard her last year, and our last speaker talked about Anina's work. She's a Dutch theologian, worked with Charles Quispel, a Gnostic expert. So you know, they're working hard on making up for everything.
Yeah. Well, none of us are universals, or you know, I love many of the things the Dutch have done. I just know about them in the context of the Hudson Valley. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's been awesome. So look, any final questions, and then we can go on to we can have our next speaker maybe a bit early. That'd be fun. Krishna Rose, who's waiting there.
I'd just like to say something. You know, thank you again, Sophie. I just recently finished The Red Tent for the first time, and it was such a breath of fresh air to breathe into these women's lives, what they could have been like, you know, because what we read in the holy texts, the sacred texts, you know, they're a little, it's on the page, it's a little bit, it's kind of two-dimensional. And what you've done, what you shared with us today is you know, that you're helping us step into what Mary's life could have been like, what her inner psychological space could have been like, what her day-to-day lived experience could have been. And I think that that's so refreshing and so needed, because so many of us kind of get stuck in trying to figure out who that real historical Mary Magdalene was. So I want to thank you again for that.
Thank you
today.
Thank you so much for including me, Annalisa. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different perspectives on who she could have been. And I think one of them that I tried to honor was what would it have been like to be raised as a Jewish woman who really believed in Judaism but was also oppressed by it? Like, how would you navigate that tension if you were a spiritual seeker? Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm so excited to read your forthcoming books.
Can I just add another comment, Sophie, before you go? One of our speakers at the first conference, actually, who met Bruce Chilton, was a woman called Joan Clark, who's been having trouble with audio. I don't think she can talk, but she's been listening to a lot of this. Joan presented at that first conference, and then down in Allée-les-Bains, the Pyrenees. The kind of the smell world of Mary and the ashram, let's call it, in relation to what we now call aromatherapy. Joan is an aromatherapist who's developed certain healing oils using spices that are around in their time, like some of the ones you mentioned, frankincense and so on. And she actually created a scent which she channeled that was the scent of Christ. You know, it was revealed to her. I mean, it's a shame Joan can't say this. I'm saying it on her behalf. And she gave us a little sampler of this thing. And so she was doing something similar to what you're doing, going through scent, recreating the smells of that time. And in her world, understanding of Mary, Mary was in charge of the aromatherapy of the ashram, you know, which is another complementary to what you're saying. Have you looked into that at all? Do you think, because your talk was very much about oils?
I think that, I mean, I think that she was anointing, and, you know, the herbal element of sacred rituals was a big part of Judaism at that time period. And I think we can see from the Gospels that that's something that Miriam is really associated with. So yeah, I definitely believe that. I would love to smell that.
The Jesus smell, yeah. I'll see if Joe, I'll put your emails, I'll put you in touch, you and Joan Clark. And she might be able to talk to us again next year, I hope, about what she's doing. Okay, Jonathan, did you have a comment you want to make? You've picked up on the oppression of Orthodox Christians.
Jonathan.
Jonathan Harvey.
I know Jonathan. Hi, Jonathan.
Do you want to comment about that?
Well, I had nothing further to say really than what I stuck in the chat box, but this is, I just think, a perennial problem faced by thousands, perhaps millions of people today, that they very earnestly see some deep and profound value in a religion that is also helping, acting as an agent of oppression. And the question of untangling, it's like untangling a ball of yarn with two different types of threads in it. And you've got this thread you want and a thread you don't want, all tangled up in the same ball of yarn, and you're trying to separate it like Psyche separating those seeds or something in Psyche. So I just think that's a very relevant image, and it's, you know, it's one I live with all the time, and many of my best friends.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's really important.
Yeah.
Thank you,
And
Jonathan.
also the kind of ecological dimension to Sophie's work, because we talk about the oppression of people, but there is the trouble with monotheistic absolutism of whatever variety it is that it creates a narrative where it's okay to oppress the earth, nature, the plants, the trees, the animals. And the direct route is to global warming and global meltdown. We're having forest fires in France, all over the world, you know. Do we need to relocate the theological source of this in this sort of absolutist monotheism, and reclaim what Sophie's doing, sort of reclaim the ecological wisdom at the heart of these esoteric teachings? You know, I think that's what might be helpful in an age of, you know, global warming.
That's what I believe. I mean, I also think that ecological information is always contextual. You can't transplant, you know, how to tend to plants from one valley across countries to another continent and climate. So I do think if the Gospels or Mary tell us anything, it's to look for the ecological parables where we are situated now. You know, what are the plants and the animals and the scents and smells in a 5-mile radius of our home that have something to teach us?
Yeah. And I see somebody's put a comment, Yeshua would probably not make it through any theological school these days.
Yeah, true, absolutely. I think he would hate the kinds of things that have been attached to him.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, look. Any last comments, and then we'll invite Krishna Rose to speak. Oh, Joan. Yeah, she is still there. So she's heard. This is the Sacred Sense lady. You guys need to get in touch with each other. Right. Okay. Now, thank you again, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you, Annalisa.
I have a daughter called Sophia as well, so she will be watching this, and I'm sure she'll resonate 100% with what you're doing, because she's a poet, an eco-activist, a green, and a spiritual person. So, yeah.
Well,
right.
Hello to her. Thank you.
Now, Annalisa, do you want to introduce our next speaker? We have Krishna Rose to.
Absolutely. Krishna Rose. Yes, here you are on my list, my updated list. So Krishna Rose is founder of the Sisterhood of the Rose. She's a leader in the field of Mary Magdalene activation, knowledge, and wisdom. Author of award-winning historical novel, Woman in Red, Magdalene Speaks. She propounds that after 30 years of research, this could well be the closest true story of Christ you will ever witness. In honor of the Magdalene, Krishna Rose will be will create a sacred space for healing and divine activation. And she has a list of things here that we could bring if you read that in advance. The title of her presentation today is Oracle of the Grail, Prophetess, Priestess of the Magdalene. Welcome, Krishna. Is she here?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Hello, nice to meet you all.
Hi.
So let me begin by lighting a candle in Mary Magdalene's honor, calling in her lit flame to our gathering, to my words, that I may truly represent the incredible woman that she was and is, and how she is affecting our collective environment right as we speak. And this is due to the messianic cause, which she is not just the embodiment of it, but her vibration and her frequency as the feminine Christ. She embodied the path. She led the way. She showed by example how we should give up our egos, how we can release ourselves and unshackle ourselves from every illusion, from everything that holds our spirit down into the flesh and into reincarnation, therefore into more and more suffering. And Yeshua's Jesus Christ, his message was so profound that it has spanned the centuries, surprisingly so, despite, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Despite the church's vicious attacks upon the Magdalene line and their bloodline descendants over the last 2,000 years, which was horrific and has never really been addressed, you know, and these things are like a collective wound in the people's subconscious. And I think this is why, you know, when people came out talking about the possibility of Mary Magdalene having been married to Jesus, and gradually the evidences started to unfold as people did their research. And as I began my research into the true story, I was astounded because there was just so much there if you put yourself in the mindset of how they lived, how they prayed, how they worshipped, how they ate, how they fasted, how they bowed, how they threw their egos down, how they came together to break down all of the walls that divide us from one another. And that was Jesus's messianic cause. He came to unite all souls all around the world. He was not just the Messiah of the Romans or the Jews. He's the Messiah of the world. People underestimate his true power, and they more so underestimate Mary Magdalene's true power, who was the woman embodying the path that we are meant to follow, how we are meant to live, how we're meant to give everything up, let go of everything and just be a vessel of love, to be present with everyone you meet and to share love, to give love, to see the good in everyone, because there is good in everyone. And that is the embodiment of Jesus's teachings. And Mary Magdalene, she gave up everything to go in search of the kingdom within. She faced every hell in the 7 hells, and she went through the 7 heavens, and she saw everything in creation. And she became the embodiment of the path. that we're supposed to follow that. 24 hours a day, we have to give up all selfish wanting to become peaceful in our connection with the divine, in whatever path you are in. And this is the golden age. The golden age is for us to come to this higher understanding that we are not these designated religions and beliefs. None of these things matter in Holy Spirit, in devotion. So there's a lot of different directions that I could go in, because I really dedicated my life to figuring out the story of Mary Magdalene and Yeshua. And I really want to use their beautiful ways and teachings to unite all of us, all around the world, in their names today, in honor of Mary Magdalene, because that's what she would want us to do. That's what Yeshua would want us to do, that we are united together as one spiritual and human family around the world right now in this moment, in divine presence. And their story survived the impossible. But as I began my research, I just felt really called to write their story, because what I discovered was a story that was very different from the church. Of course, now many of us have done our research. I feel honestly really honored that you even invited me to come here today to speak. I think all of you are incredible scholars and brilliant minds and beautiful poets and healers, and I just feel really grateful to be here today with all of you, among you. And so first I want to just say that there was a life after the resurrection. And when I discovered the evidences for Jesus and Mary Magdalene's life after the resurrection, when they disappeared from Judea, nobody knew where they'd gone. You know, the body of Christ had disappeared. Few people had visions of him. He just disappeared. The whole family disappeared except for James.
Sorry, Krishna Rose, can you unmute? There's somehow you got muted then.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You
Can
said
you
you
hear me
disappeared
now?
and then you went off.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know how that happened.
No problem.
Does anybody know where I left off?
Yeah, you said they after the crucifixion they just disappeared.
Yes.
You were going to tell us about what happened next.
Yes. So Jesus was precious commodity. He is the Messiah. They had a plan. They're not going to let the Messiah just like get crucified. They definitely had a plan to bring him down early from the cross, because people who were crucified back then, they were usually generally on the cross for 24 to 48 hours before they asphyxiated from water filling up in the lungs, blood filling up in the lungs. But Jesus was brought down after 4.5 hours. He had to go through crucifixion, and he was given the sponge from Joseph of Arimathea to feign death. It had belladonna in it, which was quite commonplace for the royals, the aristocrats, the wealthy people, that they had that ability to give that kind of sponge to feign death. That their heart rate would slow and slow and slow until they seemed dead. But I believe that Caiaphas had a plan. He wanted to make sure that Jesus did not survive that crucifixion. And therefore he paid the Roman soldier to pierce him in the side. That was not common practice. They would break the legs. That was common practice, but not after 4.5 hours. Anyway, they had a plan. They wanted to resuscitate him, but they didn't. What they didn't have was the knowledge that the sword was going to pierce Jesus. So they did everything that they could to try to resuscitate him. There's evidence of the jars of myrrh and frankincense and aloes. Why would these three oils be in a death chamber? Now, yes, of course, there's some burial, there's burial rituals of oils, but these were large jars, and myrrh is a pain reliever. Frankincense is a skin healer and an antiseptic, and aloes is a regurgitative. It helps you vomit up the poison. So I just started seeing that there was so much more to his story. After the resurrection, he had to escape. The whole family had to leave. Their lives were in danger. They wanted to save him. By hook or by crook, they managed to get away, and he managed to return from the dead because he's the Messiah, and he said he was going to do it, and he did it because of his pact with God, that by raising him on the third day, that the whole world would forever know of the kingdom and the kingdom's importance in all spiritual paths and in every spiritual practice, that no matter what faith we follow, that if we are not seeking the kingdom within, closing our minds to the outside world for a little while, and going inside and allowing your mind to become a crucible, a grail that holds holy energy and frequency. And this energy and this vibration is all around us. And the sages and the saints and the enlightened ones and the prophets and the Messiah, they know the secrets of spirit, and therefore they will do anything to serve the Almighty, even allowing yourself to be crucified, that it was done as an offering of love to God, that I am willing to die for you, that my message will span the centuries. My message of your love and of your kingdom will span the centuries, and nothing else about Jesus's life matters. Whether he was married, whether he was not married, they're details, private details. Will anybody ever really know? No one's ever going to really know. But there are quite a few breadcrumbs that head towards Alexandria, just as Laurie Lumbie was saying earlier. After the resurrection, they fled there. They went to the Therapeutae in Scetis, in mountains above Alexandria. There's evidence of it. The Therapeutae, they helped Yeshua recover. They were experts with healing. He was not in a good way. Even though he had come back, he was in a very difficult, precarious situation. A lot of blood loss, a lot of pain, a lot of swelling. He couldn't walk. And there's evidence of not just them then going to the south of France and living amongst the Jewish tribes who were already settled there at that time. But then there's evidence on the Gypsy Road, where the gypsies of the south of France and in Turkey and Persia have recorded in their songs and in their ways a memory of being with Sarah Tamar, the daughter of Mary Magdalene, on the Gypsy Road. And that is how Sarah Tamar became affiliated with the worship of Kali Ma. Kali Ma is a Hindu goddess, she's black. Who is Kali Ma? Kali Ma is a Hindu goddess. She is an expansion of the supreme goddess. Her job is to destroy everything that is false in us, to cut every illusion. Now, this was very aligned with Mary Magdalene and her daughter, Sarah Tamar, and Yeshua, and they were along the Silk Road. And then, of course, they meet Saul. That was not just a vision, that was a real meeting. It was recorded. Oh, I mean, what an amazing interaction that is and was. And I feel like I really got to delve into their story and record what I was witnessing as I was writing their story, just from the evidence that I was coming up with and following the breadcrumbs, and then their arrival in Ephesus, where Mother Mary then resided for a while. She needed to recover. She was not feeling well, and there were very beautiful Roman baths there at the time, lots of goddess worship, and Mother Mary then decided to stay there for a while. But Yeshua had other plans. He was the risen Messiah. And there was also a prophecy in India in the Bhavishya Mahapurana, which is a very ancient scripture. Bhavishya Mahapurana. And it is within this book, they purport to tell all of the world's most anticipated events. And the arrival of the risen Messiah in India was one of them. That after his crucifixion, that where he had been crucified by his own people, that he was seen in India, and he lived amongst not just the Buddhist monks where he stayed and tried to recover for a while. They were also experts in healing and herbs, and they believed that Yeshua was their risen Dalai Lama. There was a prophecy that he would come. So they were ecstatic because they had the risen Messiah in their midst, and he was there for a while, recovering. And the monks there, they recorded the conversations that they had with the risen Messiah, and all of his teachings and wisdom were written down in scrolls and put down in cellars of this ancient Buddhist temple up in Hemis, above Kashmir. Well, after this, there's evidence that Jesus went to Kashmir, and it's there that he pretty much spent the rest of his life amongst the lost tribes of Judea. The risen Messiah came to unite all people, all religions. We're all brothers and sisters before God and Goddess, and that was their message. Their message of the kingdom spanned the centuries because of their sacrifices. So I give thanks to Mary Magdalene for lighting the way for my mind and my heart and my consciousness to have been so honored to have been able to write a very beautiful rendition of her life with Jesus. The book begins at the crucifixion. I finish what Dan Brown did not, what Kathleen McGowan did not. I finish their story. And there is evidence, and the teachings, many of them are teachings that came from India, things that people didn't know about him living in India, There's a tomb there in Rosabal. You can look it up. There's evidence. People knew Yeshua and Mary. You know, this is amazing. I'm half Indian. My family is actually Kashmiri. When I was 8 years old, I was taken to Jesus's tomb. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but I thought, how strange. Why would Jesus's tomb be here in India? Didn't he like float off on a cloud? But no, as I went into the research about Christ's life and his mission and his message, he came for so much more. He came to unite all of us in the energy and frequency of divine love. They embodied this love. They taught this love. They gave compassionately unto all living beings. Anyone who was suffering, they would give their last penny to help another living being. We've forgotten how to be generous. There's always so many people who are suffering so much more than we are. I find it almost impossible to pass somebody on the street who's homeless and not at least acknowledge them. Even if I can't give them the money, I'll just like say, hey, God bless you. You know, sorry, I can't do anything, I'll pray for you. Just to acknowledge their presence. I see so much homelessness. I think, how would Jesus, what does it mean to be Christed? And where does this name Christ come from? This was another thing that I found in the Indian texts, is that he was known by different names in India. Isha Masih was one of them. Isha means Supreme Lord, Masih means Messiah. So the people who were protecting Jesus's tomb in Srinagar, Kashmir, they knew who he was and they were protecting him. Now, you can't go anywhere near this tomb anymore. It's surrounded by people with turbans on and machine guns. You can't go anywhere near it. It's very strange. It's very sad. And I don't understand, but it is a bit strange that that's where the Messiah's tomb is. You'd think that would be front page news, really, when you think about it. And then the other thing that should be front page news is that the Catholic Church lied for 2,000 years and told us a lie about Jesus' wife, Mary Magdalene, who we honor today. She is our queen. She is the feminine Christ. She was Christed by him. She was blessed by him. And she was given wisdom that I believe now, with this sudden interest, there's such an interest in the last 50 years in Mary Magdalene. Like, where did this suddenly come from? It's like a wave, bigger and bigger and bigger, with everyone writing these amazing books and, you know, uncovering a story that was not what we had been told by the church and by our schools and by the Bible. But there was more to the story. So I felt so passionate to write their story. And I have to say, it was a really amazing, blissful, and torturous experience to write their story, because their story is so tragic. Oh, I mean, when I wrote the crucifixion scene, I felt like I was there, and I wrote what I saw. And I think I painted a beautiful tapestry where people feel like they're witnessing it, feeling it in their own heart. I've heard from a lot of readers who read my book that they did experience, you know, that feeling like you were there. What does this mean? Why did this man die for us? Why did he do this? And why did God allow it? Why would a loving God allow it? Jesus, oh, his devotion just far outweighed the Lord's love for Jesus. He allowed him to do it because he wanted the message of the kingdom to stay alive over the last 2,000 years, and miraculously it has. I feel so honored to have written this book. I feel like I went through 7 layers of hell. Literally, I witnessed every kind of hell that human souls go through when they leave this world, when they have done horrible things, and what their consequences are in the afterlife. And I found evidences to back up everything that I wrote within the Vedic scriptures. The Srimad Bhagavatam, the 5th canto, very deeply and clearly explains the different hells, vividly, every hell that human beings go through when they make bad choices. And I just felt like Mary Magdalene when she saw these things. Her messianic cause became wanting to keep that flame of devotion that Yeshua had alive all of these years. And now she is returning as the feminine divine, not as the feminine divine. She is returning the feminine divine. Mary Magdalene was the reason, the way that the church usurped the family of Jesus, their bloodline, their lineage, their throne, their messianic throne. The church wanted it for themselves, and they did everything that they possibly could to stamp out any evidences. So throwing Mary Magdalene under the bus, well, one can only imagine how humiliating that might be for any beautiful, powerful woman, you know. It certainly, I think, was one of the deepest initiations in her life of throwing down her ego. Now, it was interesting that Laurie Lumbie was talking about the need of embodying the divine and overcoming the lower nature, you know, the 7 chakras and the 7 energetic centers that connects our spirit to the flesh. And each one of these sacred centers are actually like demons that we need to slay, we need to overcome. We need to overcome our iniquities, our weaknesses, our habits that drag us down, that hold us back, that prevent us from advancing in our consciousness, in our devotion, in our love for God, in our searching for God, in our searching for the kingdom. So, let me think. So what is her importance? Mary Magdalene's importance is so vast, because when we can accept that Yeshua was married, which of course he would have been, he was a Davidic prince. She was a princess in the lineage of Benjamin. Their families interbred for centuries. I mean, for sure they were betrothed very young. Now, earlier, I saw there was a discussion about John the Baptist having been, you know, the rumor that John the Baptist may have been married to Mary Magdalene before Yeshua. Now, this is a rather interesting take on the story, and I believe it to be true. I'll tell you why. Because Yeshua and Mary Magdalene and John, their family, they would gather together in Galilee in the summers and spend summers together, their cousins, their family. They interbreed and they grew up together. Now, she was betrothed to Jesus, probably at quite a young age. I would guess around 8 years old was pretty much the norm for aristocrats. You know, back then, that was the custom, to betroth people young. So Yeshua and Mary Magdalene would definitely have been paired up because they had a destiny. Now, when Jesus went into the temple and had his bar mitzvah when he was 13 and all but disappeared like a puff of smoke, the only evidence of where Jesus went during those years was again in India. This time in Jagannath Puri. Jagannath Puri is a very beautiful beach town, very luscious. It's a place of divine worship. It's a place where people go to worship God and to experience divine love in great states of ecstasy. And it's known for that. And Jesus went to a school there, and there is evidence of him being there and studying there in this school with the seventh Shankaracharya in the Jagannath Puri state. Now, I have had discussions with a pure saint. You don't have to believe that I met a pure saint, that's okay, but I know what I know. To me, he was my living Jesus. To me, he reminded me so much of walking with Jesus. I feel like he activated me in some way. He activated my devotion, and he allowed me to integrate bhakti, the experience of divine love, with not just one religion, like I'm a Christian or I'm a Muslim or I'm a Hindu or a Vaishnava or whatever. It's none of those things. You're in the school of devotion, and that unites all people, and that is the message of Christ. Now, this name Christ, another thing that gives credence to Jesus's time in India, is that in India there are many books that are written, scrolls that were written, proving that Jesus was living there, including the king of Kashmir, King Shalivahan. He had, all of these kings, they have scribes who write down everything that the king does and who he meets. There was a prophecy in Kashmir that the risen Messiah would come to this place on this rock and sit in white robes upon a rock, risen, with bleeding wounds on his hands and feet. And the king would come and meet the Messiah, and it would change India forever. So, very interesting. Now, how do we unite the teachings of India with Christianity, with what Christ was teaching? They are one and the same. I see absolutely no difference between the core of Judaism is love of God, the kingdom, consciousness of the kingdom, consciousness of oneself, of one's actions, one's deeds, living a clean life, being devoted to God in whatever path you may be in. Even if you're not on any path, even if you're an atheist, it's just good to be a good person, to not create bad karma, to do good unto others. That can only be a good message. So, does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Krishna Rose, for your talk. It was a bit of a poem that you shared with us, and I'm sure lots of people have got questions. You've argued that Jesus was in India. Can I just clarify something? Was this before or after the crucifixion? And was he there with, or was it both, before and after?
It was
And
both.
Mary Magdalene with him afterwards in India?
Yes. So very great question. Love it. Yes, both. Now, evidence of Mary Magdalene being in India, yes, this is very interesting, is in Kashmir. It's very traditional in religions in India to depict the god and the goddess together. You have Radha and you have Krishna, you have Sita and you have Ram. You know, it's all about divine love, divine feminine, divine masculine. Now, oh gosh, sorry, I could go down so many rabbit holes. Where was I going with that?
Well, was the first part, it's a question in two parts. Part A was, I mean, what evidence have you that Jesus was in India, either before or after his?
Yeah, very good. Okay, so in India, there's evidence, there's lots of evidence actually. There's more evidence for Jesus ever having existed in India than there is in Judea. Sorry, that's the truth. Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that's the truth. There's so much evidence of his life in India. The monks in Hemis have the scrolls where they were healing him after his resurrection, and they were helping him. My saint, my guru in India, he went to this place in Hemis where the monks were, and because they knew that my guru was a pure saint, they took him down into the caves and they showed him scrolls that people had been rumored to have seen or stolen from, you know, the church and archaeologists, people who were interested in finding out the truth about Jesus, truth seekers. It's important to not always just believe the fake news narrative of Jesus's life. Why would the Messiah die on the cross, rise, do the impossible, overcome death? That was not easy, to come into a very injured, painful body. What for? Why did he do that? Did he do it so that he would go float off on a cloud 30 days later or 45 days later? Absolutely not. That was not the prophecy. The prophecy was that he would rise on the third day and he would go in search of the lost tribes of Judea to unite them as brothers and sisters around the world. That was the Messiah's message. The crux of that is the message that we're all brothers and sisters, no matter what religion we are. And I think that is the beauty. It's like the glue that can help all of us to just heal every wound in the collective society. If we could just love one another and embody their ways and embody their teachings and be present, embody Holy Spirit, be prayerful, take to an actual methodology that connects you to the divine, whatever that is. For me, it's chanting. I pray. I have beads that I wear around my neck. I whip them off anytime I have a moment and I feel like praising God. And I may sing, I may praise the Lord. Hallelujah. I never know what's going to come out of me, but the divine love has to have a way to increase itself within the grail, the vessel of this flesh that we're embodied in. And that is what Mary Magdalene, I believe that's her message.
Right, thank you very much. That's lovely. You're very much on the Bhakti path. You
Yes,
seem like a Bhakti Mary Magdalene devotee. I love it. Queen Suki, would you like to ask your question, please?
I would. What I wanted to ask you, one, I really loved your talk. And what I wanted to say was, I wanted to ask you if, when you're doing this writing, do you feel a spirit, like the spirit of Mary Magdalene? Because I am not raised, I'm Irish and Scotch by birth. I'm Korean, I'm Italian. So half of me is very, but in some ways, disconnected from it, the Catholicism and all of that. I grew up in Ohio in the States. Now I live in California. But I've had moments, the reason I'm in this conversation is I have felt her spirit. And it's very John and Yoko Ono to me. And so I guess that's why I'm, it's very John and Yoko. So it's a story that I see written over and over again. Even Nicki Minaj is like, I am the female Wheezy. It's like a whole thing where, in an earlier talk, it was a perhaps, where this seemed a definite of the divine feminine, because I would also imagine that from her point of view, Jesus would have been like that, so she's honoring him, but in sort of the case of Yoko and John, she had such a prolific life and career pre her Jesus years and all the, so.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything about her life is amazing. The more that I delved into her, the more that 100% when I sit down, when I was writing for her, it was a holy experience.
Yeah.
I was clean in my body, clean in my dress. I begin writing, sometimes, late at night, 9 o'clock at night, sometimes. My body was very tired. I have lupus. It wasn't easy. I had a lot of pain in my body. But I was just so dedicated to write her story before I thought I was going to die, because I was so sick. So through my near death, I lit myself with Mary Magdalene's strength. And I sat in this chair and I wrote for her a symphony of her life, of her times, of her ways, of her thoughts, of her teachings. She totally let me see everything. I felt like I was seeing it as if I was there, and I was just writing it.
That's what it seems like from how you're speaking upon it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it seems like she speaking to you.
And then afterwards, I would just be like so high from the holiness that I had allowed to embody through me into these words in this book. And I feel like, some people, they don't get my writing because people, we're living in a Walmart culture where people are flicking through things. People don't.
You're speaking my language.
They
Yes.
don't want to be present. They don't want to be real. People are hiding, and we're not loving. We're judging each other. And it's like I feel like this return of Mary Magdalene is allowing the return of the divine feminine, because she is returned. Because if Jesus can be married, then why can't God? Why would any God not want to have a beautiful woman by his side? Who are we to deny God a feminine, a counterpart? What arrogance are we that we would deny him a girlfriend? I mean, come on, he's God. He's the hottest male in creation, and he's going to have the hottest female in creation as his beloved. And that's the truth of it. And it got wiped out with Mary Magdalene, you see. They took people away from the worship of Isis, and they replaced Isis with Mother Mary. In fact, Paul was the first one to commission a painting of Mother Mary with baby Jesus on her lap in exactly the same position as Isis with baby Horus, the divine child, the Messiah of the people back then. And in order to wipe out that story, they had to make Mother Mary into a divine mother, into a virgin, because Isis was a miraculous virgin. Now, what I see in the story is not that. The Mary that I was shown through my research within the writing of this story, a lot just was given to me, to be honest. But it totally aligned with the veins of history that I could see all around the world. It was just like piecing together all the fragmented pieces of the Jesus story and putting them all together and just making sense of it all, and then writing it into a story and being their voice, carrying their flame into the modern era. What does Mary Magdalene want to communicate? So the book is called Woman in Red. Magdalene.
I just ask a final question, Krishna. We're coming up to the end of your time.
Yes.
Can you just tell us the plot line of your book? You take Mary Magdalene to France.
Yeah.
And then does she die in France?
Eventually she does, yes.
And what happens to Jesus?
Yeah.
Where does Jesus go in your...
Okay, so here's the evidence. The evidence is they all arrived in Kashmir. The family, all of them. Mother Mary remained in Ephesus. She wasn't well enough to travel there. She stayed there with John, Jesus's younger brother. Now, Mother Mary, she had 5 children. She had 3 marriages, because if you look at history, a Davidic princess would never, ever, be like raped, as some people say that the father of Jesus was Pantera, a Roman soldier who raped her. Codswallop, the Messiah would never be born through a rape. Come on, people, where's your faith? He was a king.
No, I thank you. I get your point. Well, I think those of us that want to know the story are going to have to read the book. I have one final comment, really. It's a comment.
Yeah.
If you heard Sophie's story,
Yes.
the poet, she would probably say, if she was still on this call, that, I mean, you many times you said Jesus is the Messiah of the whole world, not just for Christians, not just for Judah, but for the whole world.
Absolutely.
And I think what Sophie would say, and other ecological thinkers would say, that is it time we recontextualize the concept of a Messiah into the ecological it comes from?
Absolutely.
Maybe we should unthink this idea of one absolute total Messiah for all time, because I'd get a bit twitchy if it turns out that Jesus and Mary Magdalene reappear on a cloud and start nuking the planet unless we all believe in them. Do you know what I mean?
No way, come on. These are
there's a shadow of absolutism about that concept, And I think Sophie
they would never support violence, and there's been too much violence said and done in Jesus' name over the last 2,000 years. There's been so much bloodshed in Jesus' name that the church, who usurped the throne of the Messiah and his bloodlines and teachings and ways, true ways, they gradually just sort of became folk tales, and they really tried very hard to stamp out not just the bloodlines. I mean, the whole burning witch times where everyone with red hair was burned. I mean, come on, wake up. What is that? They're trying to stamp out the Mary Magdalene lineage. They didn't want her energy and her bloodline and her frequency on the earth, because she has claim to the throne of David, the messianic throne. That means the protectors of the Grail, the protectors of the true knowledge and wisdom of all devotees.
Sure. No. Thank you. I get your devotion. It's very intense, and I'm sure many people resonate. Others might find, we want to ask more questions. but we don't have time, sadly.
Okay, no problem. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting
Well,
me.
stick around because there will be a quarter of an hour when we can have discussion and more questions if you
Okay.
want to wait.
Sure.
I want to introduce our next speaker now, who is joining us from the hot part of, I think, Tucson, namely Dr. Annalisa Derr, who is basically helping organize this conference and the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. Annalisa spoke to us last year, but since then she finished her doctorate at the Pacifica Graduate Institute. She looked at the mythography around women's rituals, menstruation, all kinds of interesting things. And she's been a ritual theatre performer who's created rituals around Mary Magdalene and other figures in sacred places around the planet. And so her talk today is entitled Oracle of the, Finding Mary Magdalene, a Pilgrimage and Homecoming for the Soul. And she's also the founder and producer of the Journey to the Goddess TV, which is, she's always interviewing really interesting goddess spokespeople and practitioners. I'm sure many of the speakers on this conference, Annalisa will probably want to interview you separately for your views on the goddess. So without further ado, Annalisa, please, it's over to you. And thanks to Krishna for your talk and all your passion. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Krishna. And thanks, Thomas. Can you enable me to play a PowerPoint, please? Okay. So while he's doing that, I just want to say too, I need to make a correction. Earlier I said that it was the Manichaeans that believed that John the Baptist was married to Mary Magdalene, but it was the Mandaeans, I believe is how you pronounce it. Anyway, I checked with a colleague who's read quite a bit of their kind of religious beliefs. So I'm going to post that too, so that correction is official. And I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, so Finding Mary Magdalene, Pilgrimage, a Homecoming for the Soul. So today I'm going to offer a personal narrative, a story of how I came to fall in love and dedicate my life to Mary Magdalene and the goddess more generally. And this is kind of, I think, great culmination. The first year I presented at MMSA, I actually talked more about my, my goddess performances that Dr. Thomas talked about through the lens of Mary Magdalene and resacralizing the female body and reclaiming sacred female power. So that's really where my work begins and ends. Well, let's just say begins and focuses with regard to Mary Magdalene. And then last year, I spoke about the contemplative and the active Mary Magdalene through the lens of kind of medieval theology and Dante's The Divine Comedy. So again, this year I'll be doing the personal narrative, and it's really exciting for me to share these blogs that I wrote during my Mary Magdalene pilgrimage. So without further ado, in 2014, I quit my job. I put my belongings in storage, left New York City, and embarked on a solo Mary Magdalene pilgrimage in the south of France. But my quest to find Mary really began several years earlier, when I was in South India training in classical Indian dance. After several encounters with the Hindu goddesses in the gestures and embodiments of the dance, as well as in the culture at large, I had the profound realization, as I'm sure many of you have, that something was seriously wrong with my own religious upbringing. The feminine divine was missing. I wondered how there could ever be balance and equanimity between men and women in the human world if it was missing or suppressed in the celestial divine world. So like many women and men before me, I began my search for the missing goddess in the Christian tradition. And it wasn't long before Mary Magdalene appeared to me, and she did so as a face of the divine feminine. Sitting deep in meditation one day, surrounded by a warm glow of candles and the relaxing sound of devotional music, I felt her presence, clear, firm, and so loving, arise within me. And I knew that she would be my guide and my guru. From that moment forward, my heart ached to know her completely. This longing to know who the real Mary Magdalene was, or in fact, who she is, propelled me to France, and then after that to 7 years of graduate school. And essentially, this Mary Magdalene pilgrimage initiated me into a life committed to serving Mary and the divine feminine. By the end of my journey, the pilgrimage journey that is, I realized that pilgrimage, the outward journey to the Magdalene, or any deity or saint that we journey toward, is actually an inner journey of coming home to oneself, to heal oneself from the inside out. For me, this homecoming and inner healing through the archetypal Mary Magdalene has meant asking myself deep questions about the nature of what it means to be a woman. For example, through the making of Mary Magdalene into a prostitute, particularly in context of several millennia of Western cultural fears surrounding women's sexuality, bodies, and social power. I believe Dr. Joanna spoke about that earlier today. So Mary Magdalene was made and has been remade to symbolize dangerous femininity. Thus, healing has required me to challenge such patriarchal conditionings, the narratives, the beliefs, and the behaviors about women, and go deep within my female body to find the answers through my own embodiment of what it means to be a woman. So that has been the journey since the beginning of the pilgrimage and through the graduate school process. My journey marked the beginning of my life's pilgrimage to reclaim the goddess as a path of self-realization, and including a reclamation and an integration of sovereign and sacred female power. So now I'm going to share a few excerpts from the blog series I wrote while I was in France. And since that time, I have kind of retroactively framed this pilgrimage in 3 stages, which amplify the 3 Mary Magdalene archetypes that I feel are primary, at least in my experience, to the Mary Magdalene pilgrimage. They also happen to be the 3 aspects of the mythos and the archetypes, the Magdalene mythos and archetypes that most resonate with me. So, and I just want to frame it that way because I also envision that this will be the framing for the Mary Magdalene book that I write in the future and the pilgrimage tours that I will give in the future as well. So part 1, the devotional Mary Magdalene. So the devotional Mary Magdalene archetype amplifies the contemplative binary, or it amplifies the contemplative binary of the active and the contemplative soul as exemplified in the medieval Mary Magdalene, which again, I discussed in detail last year. And the devotional Magdalene is probably the archetypal Mary Magdalene that I most resonate with and I'm most hooked by right now. And the mythos and the geography surrounding the devotional Magdalene amplifies feminine death and rebirth themes, like these archetypal themes. So, for example, in the geographies, we see the cave, and then in the architecture of the basilica, the churches, the basilicas, we see that we have the crypt. But also, as I was writing this, the truth is that you see these mythos of death, feminine death and rebirth symbolisms, like old goddess symbolisms that predate Christianity throughout the entire pilgrimage route. Okay, so here we are. Blog 1, the Grotto of La Sainte-Baume, the pilgrimage begins. After climbing from Nan-la-Pin to the base of Le Plan d'Eau on what was practically a single-lane road, I came upon it, the La Hostillerie de la Sainte-Baume. After depositing my baggage, I took a walk outside. The cave-turned monastery lay just above the treetops, awaiting my arrival the following day. I walked through the ancient untamed grass strewn with poppies and crickets. I felt the wind upon my face, which I was later told was coming eastward from Greece. Ah, only a Frenchman can make such a statement sound so romantic. I imagined Mary Magdalene walking up upon this land 2,000 years ago. I slept well, knowing I was in the care of Mary. The following day at the Communal Breakfast, which included a morning prayer and Sunday school songs, I met 17-year-old Marie, her mother Jean-Marie, and grandmother Marie Therese, all of whom I came to affectionately refer to as the triple goddess Marie because of their mother maiden crone status. Jean asked me why I had come all this way by myself to La Sainte-Baume. I told her, for Mary Magdalene. Why? Because I love her. Jean looked at me with piercing intensity and said, it is because she had so much love for Jesus. Taken aback by this simple yet deeply resonant statement, I could do nothing but nod in sincere agreement. It was then I understood the real impact Mary Magdalene has had on her beloved followers for millennia. I looked around the room and suddenly realized that it was full of people with a deep love and reverence for one of the most important women in Jesus' life. Many of us had different interpretations of this love, but it was the pureness of Mary's love, not a religious pureness, but the pure potential of unconditional love that brought us together. And it wasn't just me. Hundreds of people come to La Sainte-Baume every day to hike to the cave and honor her. Later, as Marie and I entered the cave, a cool dampness embraced us. I could hear the dripping of water. The haunting glow of the candles allowed the presence of Mary to become very real. I felt drawn to the furthest most corner of the cave down at the base of the staircase. Walking in silence, I turned the corner and saw the statue of Mary Magdalene, cross in hand, in agony over her loss. After investigating the rest of the cave, I soon returned to this corner, feeling her presence was strongest there. I remained in prayer and gratitude for such a woman who has been misinterpreted and debased for too long. The four of us stayed on for 11 a.m. Mass. The chanting of the priest rang the bells in the cavernous space. It became increasingly clear to me that Mary is revered because of the profound love and devotion she had for Christ. Officially, she showed this love and devotion through her act of penance, as well as for her role as disciple of the disciples, who spread the message of Jesus throughout the region. She brought the message of the light and the way to France, which was synonymous with her profound love and devotion. After parting ways with my companions, I had lunch, but did not feel at ease. I heard the call in my heart and knew I needed to return to Mary in that cave and in that moment. I practically ran up the mountain. Reaching the top, out of breath, I entered the cave and was embraced by her love. I went directly for my hidden corner and prayed and asked for guidance. As I sat in meditation, she responded, "Just listen." I laughed to myself, stopped asking questions, and surrendered to the way she would have me go. Vlog 2, The Anointed. I awoke the following day with excitement on my final full day at La Sainte-Baume. I gathered my crystals and stones and picked a single poppy in the field for Mary, gently setting it in the folds of my scarf. As I looked toward the cave, hidden behind a heavy mist, I wondered what Mary would have in store for me that day. The climb was challenging. I thought maybe because I had made the trek twice the day before. Either way, I made it to the top and again went directly to my statue of Mary. I didn't know what I was going to do, so I allowed my intuition to lead the way. I found some paper and wrote a note of gratitude to Our Lady Mary. I set it comfortably with the poppy next to the many notes of respect curled up beside the statue. Mary spoke to my heart, and I knew in that moment my job was done at La Sainte-Baume. I stood up and reached over to gently touch the statue one last time, when at the exact moment my hand touched her, a drop of water fell from the cavernous ceiling and landed directly on my third eye. "I've been anointed!" I nearly screamed out loud. Laughing to myself, I knew Mary had given me this gift. I prepared to descend the mountain and had a feeling of accomplishment, thinking, had this been the only site I visited in France, my pilgrimage would have been complete. The following morning, it was time for me to depart. Jean, Mother of Marie, had strongly urged me to speak to the Dominican brothers about Mary, saying it would give me grace. Unsure, yet wanting to follow her advice, I knew I needed to find a way to do this. So at the end of my stay with my new friend Axel, we asked a brother about a mysterious pillar at the entrance of the forest that appears to be of Freemasonry origin. He explained that they don't know where the pillar came from, but that many people come to La Sainte-Baume for several reasons: to pray to Mother Earth, to pray to a sacred feminine, or to leave gratitude for the woman closest to Christ. I told him I thought it was beautiful that they accept all people with varying beliefs at the hostelry. And above all, I felt that the driving principle behind Mary Magdalene is love, capital L. And he countered, but what is love? Without thinking, I responded, God. God is love. And he told me that that is a point of research for people, to meditate and pray on the meaning of love. Log 3, Saint Maximin La Sainte-Baume, the relics of Saint Mary Magdalene. So you'll see on the very right here, that's a picture of the skull of Mary Magdalene in the crypt at Saint Maximin, that a few others have discussed today too. So first I decided to find a pastry to enjoy with my morning coffee. As luck would have it, I walked into the best artisanal patisserie in all of France. The shop was full of beautiful meringues, adorned with pine nuts and delicate-looking tarts. My stomach only wanted a pain au chocolat, but my eyes feasted on them all. After an exquisite moment of café life à la française, I was off in the direction of the Basilica of Saint Maximin. Saint Maximin has at its medieval core a basilica that is seemingly basic from the outside. So basic, I didn't even show you the photo. That is until you enter. I think somebody's mic is on. Could you please turn it up? So Saint Maximin has at its medieval core a basilica that is seemingly basic from the outside. That is until you enter, unsuspecting through its doors. Prepare yourself to be dazzled by the glory of its grandeur and praise of the Magdalene. Walking into a large, dark, and cavernous space, I felt as if I was entering the underworld, or perhaps the womb of Mother Earth. I was mesmerized by the magnificent stained glass windows at the front of the church. The rays of the sun hit the windows and illuminated the underworld interior of the church. As I admired the way the light from the outside world lit up the interior space, I suddenly realized why the church constructed these sacred spaces in this fashion. These churches were built to convey such ominous darkness so that the parishioners would feel as if the priest, who stood completely illuminated by the rays of the sun, was their only hope for salvation. Aha, I thought, the church was the first indoor theater house. They created a spectacle of heaven and hell right before the public's eyes, complete with a psychological and spiritual sensation of purgatory. And I would like to add today that the church interior imitates a womb-like space. It's dark, it's warm, it's safe, so that exiting the church would probably stimulate an experience of rebirth through the birth canal. And that's part of the intentional psycho-spiritual power of architecture of this and other churches and temples. In India, I think there's a similar concept. So after this realization, I found myself nearly back where I started. That is, until I turned toward the central pews and saw it. The staircase that led to the crypt that housed the alleged skull of Mary Magdalene. Touching the arch above my head, I cautiously descended the staircase into the depths of the basilica. The small crypt contained Christian artifacts protected by glass on all sides. Hidden behind thick glass and a golden iron gate was the blackened skull of Mary Magdalene. It was encased in glass and adorned with stiff golden hair and some sort of ancient outfit. I looked into where her eyes would have been and thought it so strange that the skull was kept and honored in such a way. Whether it Mary or not, we may never know. But I bowed my head in respect for the Magdalene and left the mysterious chamber. I left the basilica and traveled down the tiny streets of Saint Maximin. Before nightfall, I would be in Saint Marie de la Mer for the annual Romani Gypsy Festival honoring Saint Sarah. And this proved to be my biggest adventure yet. So now we have part 2, and this is where I see the archetypal teacher, Mary Magdalene as the teacher, right? Both in the mythologies, but also in kind of the feeling. And there's the exoteric teachings, and then there's the esoteric teachings, the outer and the inner teachings. And I think that this archetypal landscape offers both. And it has a lot of feminine death and rebirth scenes too. The cosmic womb being embodied in the Mediterranean Sea too, as the watery goddess womb. Very much aligned with ancient goddesses from the Near East. So, Sainte Marie de la Mer, part 1, the Gypsy Festival of Les Maries. As Provençal legend has it, Mary Magdalene arrived on the shores of Gaul with Mary Salome and Mary Jacobée, and possibly Joseph of Arimathea. The mystery and intrigue of this legend involves a woman named Saint Sarah. Some claim she was a native of Gaul who greeted the party fleeing the Roman Empire. Others say she arrived on the boat with the Marys, either an Egyptian handmaiden to Mary Magdalene, or better yet, the secret daughter of Jesus and Mary. Either way, Saint Sarah has become the patron saint of the Romani people the world round, and I was headed there for the annual festival in honor of her. Sainte Marie de la Mer is a tiny beach town in the Camargue region of France, which you can see down at the bottom left there, my left. It is surrounded by a national park that is filled with long green grass and canals, all of which accommodate migratory birds from Africa. The feel is somewhere between American West and Spanish conquistador. But before I found myself in Les Maries, I had to find my way there. So I made my way to the Arles tourist office and started a conversation with another woman looking to get to the festival. As it turned out, Solice, a Venezuelan national, was also on pilgrimage. Hers revolved around the Camino de Santiago in Spain, but overlapped with the Western French sites associated with Magdalene pilgrimage. Solice and I became fast friends. In fact, we were inseparable for those few days at the festival. We found the bus and we chatted the whole time about our pilgrimage experience thus far and what we hoped would happen. And as the bus approached our destination, it turned out that our hotels were right next to one another. I laughed at this synchronicity. She told me she stopped seeing our similarities and meeting in Arles as coincidences, but as something more predestined. I walked her to her hotel and made a plan to meet her in 2 hours, but she insisted on walking me to my hotel. The moments that followed were very telling of what would come. My hotel had never received my reservation and down payment, and to top it off, they were completely booked for the festival. But in her fashion, Solice said, "No problem, she's staying with me." In disbelief, I gladly accepted her offer. My ex-hotel invited us to their private dinner flamenco show that night. We gleefully arrived amongst the colorful guests and were seduced by the home-cooked food and soulful Spanish gypsy music. Romanis from the crowd, including a family from Brazil, danced and sang, and we shared wine and a love for the beautiful music. Log 5. Procession of Saint Sarah. Solice and I awoke in excited anticipation for the day's events. As if children on Christmas morning, we quickly readied ourselves for the walk into town. The streets were lined with parked campers and horses stood in stalls awaiting riders. The outskirts of town were calmly buzzing with the hum of flamenco music. We approached the center of town and found it packed with all sorts of people. Tourists, Romanis, gypsies, and flamencas, free spirits, photographers, and those anticipating a little piece of magic. We followed some beautiful music to discover it coming from inside the basilica. 11 a.m. Mass was underway and the church was packed, reminiscent of my morning subway commute, because I had lived in New York City up until that point. Solice and I tried to enter, but with no avail. Suddenly, the service ended and the wall of people broke. They began to flood out of the church and onto the streets, followed by our ornately robed priest. Within his orbit, a priest administered blessings amongst the oldest and youngest of the crowd, softly touching their foreheads with sincerity and warmth. Solice and I made our way into the church. The space had a quality of arid lightness to it and was strewn with various depictions of Saint Sarah greeting the three Marys on the shores of France. A real sense of the feminine spirit was at play in this space. I found myself meander toward the crypt. I descended the steps, touching my hand along the arched ceiling as I entered the cavernous space below. A thick wave of moist, hot air enveloped me. Votive candles bearing St. Sarah's image lined the cavernous walls. The crowd of people pushed forward into the furthest most right-hand corner of the crypt. The ceiling was low and the temperature stifling. I lit my candle and began a quiet prayer for St. Sarah. The move toward her was a dance, or more like a shuffle, with people moving in and out. Eventually, I heard the cries of the people in the back scream, "Avancez, avancez, advance, advance." Steps away from St. Sarah, I pulled out my camera in time to snap a few shots of pilgrims touch their hand to her face. And then, my turn. I gently placed my hand upon her third eye and then over my heart. Closing my eyes, I then placed that same hand over my heart. I prayed that St. Sarah would deliver me a message of meaning or purpose to my life, or at least to assure me that my search for her, the divine feminine, was not in vain. Thanking her, I quickly left the crowded underworld for the fresh air above. Reunited, Celise and I gradually made our way to the shore, resting on the sand, waiting for the event of the day. Crowds began to gather on the rocky breaches that overlooked the center of the ritual activity. Celise and I hurried to find the perfect vantage point. Minutes stretched into eternity as we waited for the procession of St. Sarah. At last, the procession approached the shore. Celise and I preened our necks to catch a sight, any sight. Alas, I thought to myself, perhaps I'll see a splash from her dive into the Mediterranean. Disappointed, I resigned myself to being a far observer of the main event. But suddenly, I heard Celise call out to me, "Anna, follow me. We did not come all this way not to see her." We weaved our way through the crowd to find an opening along the sand. Swarms of people pushed me this way and that as Celise and I continued to move ourselves closer to the shore. Miraculously, we broke through and found ourselves at full view of the procession. The priest came through, followed by several more clergy, and then there she was, the Black Madonna, St. Sarah, adorned in white and held high above the crowds for all to admire. There was a commotion in the crowd as the procession suddenly turned about face. The statue of St. Sarah had been submerged in the Mediterranean and would now make her return to the crypt within the basilica. The crowds pushed and shoved as throngs of men atop white horses came out of the water and led the procession back into town. Celise and I found ourselves as if a two-person island, surrounded on all sides by beautiful white horses. And then as quickly as it had begun, the procession receded. My head spun as I tried to process what had just taken place. Celise looked at me, a smile spreading across her face, and said, "See, I told you. We couldn't stay on that rock. Sarah was calling us." St. Sarah's final procession to the sea. So the following day, St. Sarah granted us the privilege to re-witness the procession, but from beginning to end. This time, we came face to face with the same head priest who had led the procession the previous day. As before, he was blessing the pilgrims along his processional route. Once again, he was followed by men riding atop those same beautiful white horses. The men on horseback parted the crowds, allowing the statue of the two Marys to pass through toward the sea. I thought this curious that the third Mary, Our Lady Mary Magdalene, was not represented as well. But quickly, Celise and I ran ahead, cutting through the town in an attempt to beat the head of the procession to the sea. In a matter of moments, we made it to the shore to witness the sea-bound processional ceremony unfold before our eyes. Along the route, the priests were chanting over blowhorns, "Long live les Sainte Marie, long live Saint Sarah." The crowd soulfully repeated the chant. Suddenly, a wave of otherworldly spirit took over the crowd. Time and space seemed to expand, taking me and my fellow pilgrims back to the moment that the three Marys landed upon the shores of French Gaul, greeted by Our Lady of Honor, Saint Sarah. Entranced, I watched as the pilgrims steadily possessed the two Marys, followed by Saint Sarah into the sea. Moments later, the procession turned face and began its march back toward the town. The next moments passed like a blur. Saint Sarah approached me, flanked on all sides by pilgrims willing to carry her load. My body filled with the chanting of her name, and my heart ached to embrace her. Suddenly, I reached toward Saint Sarah, and I reached out my hand. One of the young women carrying the saint grabbed my outstretched hand and placed it upon Saint Sarah's dress. Tears flooded my eyes as I gently backed away, feeling into the immensity of the moment. Time stood still as I watched the procession disappear into the streets of Sainte Marie de la Mer. In a moment of clarity, I took a tiny glass bottle and I dug it into the sand, collecting a bit of the earth that once welcomed the three Marys of the sea. Trying to catch my breath, I turned to Celise with tears in my eyes. She pulled my hand and off we went in the direction of the basilica. Back at the church, I noticed numerous rose garlands descending from the ceiling. They seemed to point to a large wooden box placed high above the altar, which was delicately painted with stories of the three Marys. Following the motions of others around me, I gently placed my hand upon the box, thanking the women one final time for their great love and courage. Later, I learned that the box is said to contain the remains of Mary Jacobea and Mary Salome. This led me to deduce that the reason Mary Magdalene was not physically included in the procession is because her journey did not end at Les Maries. Rather, it is believed that she was guided by angels to the cave of La Sainte Baume, where she continued to pray and work in the name of love. So this is the final blog I'll share with you today. And this is part 3, the archetype that constellates or in which she embodies the lover, the wife, and some of the other esoteric teachings. And I will say really quickly that blog 7 recounts my time visiting the castle of Carcassonne, while blog 8 details my visit to the angel sanctuary at Alet-le-Ben, which has since been closed. But I'm skipping those blogs and we'll just end with this blog 9, Finding Mary Magdalene. After several winding turns, I arrived at the little mountaintop village of Rennes-le-Château. I walked through the quiet streets toward the abbey, stopping at a gift shop along the road. Decked with books and jewelry and music, pretty much all things spiritual, I had this sneaking feeling that something quite unspiritual was brewing. Somehow I ended up buying a ticket for the museum, which was a conspiracy theorist's dream. The museum gift shop even sold Rennes-le-Château wine bearing Saunier's face. Despite the lack of depth, I did find delight in the Magdal Tower built on church grounds by Saunier. The church of Rennes-le-Château was tiny and darkly lit. I knew in my heart that the spirit of Mary was not there. The energy had become more about the drama and the intrigue of the Saunier story and less about her story. Mid-meditation, a camera crew entered the small church, filming a very important person and his entourage. Images of Mary were numerous, yet I found myself annoyed by the scene of Rennes-le-Château and quickly left for solitude just outside the town walls. The surrounding grounds were beautiful and lush, and despite my overall misgivings, I feel there may lay a secret of Mary hidden within the hills of Rennes-le-Château. I eagerly left, but first made time to enjoy a fabulous lavender creme brulee. Severely behind schedule and over my allotted mileage, I decided to head to Montségur. To miss such a sight was not an option for me. Despite my overwhelming car sickness, I drove like the wind through the endlessly winding roads of the Pyrenees. After much anxiety and doubt that I would ever make it to Montségur, my GPS informed me I was 5 kilometers from my destination. A heavy mist hung in the air as I drove further into the heart of the Pyrenees and Cathar country. I looked up and I was overcome by the view of a fortress nestled high above a mountain peak. Seeing this fortress, I parked my car and prepared myself for the ascent. The path was rocky and steep, but I felt encouraged by fellow pilgrims. Along the route, I could hear the melodic ringing of bells, dangling from the necks of cows far off in the distance. As I approached the summit, I turned to look out among the sea of mountain peaks and was rendered nearly speechless. "This must be what heaven looks like," I whispered. For as far as the eye could see were voluptuous green mountain peaks extending outward past Spain and reaching what I imagined to be the Atlantic Ocean. Face to face with the now abandoned, majestic fortress of Montségur, I imagined life streaming in and out of its stone walls. I entered the fortress and a sudden stillness came over me, as if I were walking into someone's intimate space. The inner walls of the fortress held the laughter of children. I could almost see them playing hide and seek and realized there was a presence still lingering from the trauma of long ago. Okay. Montségur gained notoriety for being the last stronghold of the Cathars in the face of the Crusades. History has mixed understanding of the Cathars, with the most commonly held belief that the Cathars were a serious ascetic religion that believed that the material world was sinful and therefore devoted all of their attention and energy to the spiritual realm. In esoteric circles, it is believed that the Cathars were actually the keepers of an original Gnostic Christianity, their primary teacher, Mary Magdalene, and depending on who you talk to, Jesus as well. The Cathar faith and belief held the knowledge of the Holy Grail, which was protected by the Knights Templar and had connections to the activist medieval love poets, the troubadours. Joseph Campbell talks about that in the book, The Goddesses. The church launched a full-out crusade against the Cathars and region of Languedoc. They slaughtered and burned them until only Montségur was left. After a year's siege, the water supply within the high fortress of Montségur failed, leaving the Cathars with no choice but to surrender. The church, feeling generous, gave the Cathars the option to convert to Catholicism and be saved or be burned at the stake. After a 15-day truce, it was over. All 200 Cathars, men, women, and children, calmly walked down the mountain and into the burning pyres. And that was essentially the end of the Cathars. Some people believe a few escaped and kept the knowledge still alive. Still others say those who escaped kept the royal bloodline of Mary and Jesus alive. Upon my descent, I looked out at the endless horizon and wondered what it was like for the Cathars, in the face of certain death, to see this view for the last time. So I chose to honor the Cathars the only way I knew how, by infusing each step I took down the mountain with honor and dignity for a people willing to die for their beliefs. My drive home was full of emotion. The mystique of the Pyrenees faded into perfectly manicured rolling vineyards and country houses made of stone. I returned my car without a problem and made my way back to Carcassonne. Suddenly, I realized my pilgrimage was officially over. I smiled as I reflected on the months of planning and hard work it took to prepare for this pilgrimage, which resulted in a life-changing two-week adventure. The icing on the cake, on the following day, I would be turning 31 in my new favorite French city, Arles. My heart bursting with love, I traveled from Arles to Nice and from Nice down into Italy. An open invitation awaited me in Ischia. Tears fell from my face as I crossed over the French border into Italy. For this self-proclaimed Italophile, something new was blooming inside me, something unexpected, a yearning to return to the southern region of France, where Mary Magdalene is honored and revered as a woman of courage, devotion, and passionate love. Her name and reputation have been dirtied for nearly 2,000 years as a way to manipulate and control people, particularly women. And one such result, women have been placed secondary to men. This, as history is our witness, is a great disservice to women and also to men. Although back in the States, my quest for Mary Magdalene has just begun. Many others have come before me, and surely there will be plenty to follow. To France and back, my search for Mary Magdalene has led me back to me. My journey is her journey, and from this place of wisdom, I am truly finding myself. Thank you. Ooh, just the nick of time.
Well, thank you very much, Annalisa. That
Yes.
was really wonderful, little glimpse of your life and your journeys. Thanks for sharing. Who would like to comment or ask a question? I'm sure some of us have been to some of those places. Hands up if you've got a question or a comment. I don't see any hands shooting up.
That's okay.
When did you, Annalisa, when did you make those trips? Was that like 5 years ago or?
That was in May of 2014.
Right, so it's like
I think 8 years ago now.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been back to any of them since then?
I have not. But I would like to go back now after graduate school and knowing what I know now to see how it feels. But when I read those blogs and I read my journals from that time, it feels, I have the same feeling as I did in those moments. So there's something numinous and indescribable about spiritual experiences.
So we have a question somebody's asked in chat. This is someone saying they're new to the study of Mary Magdalene. What books would you suggest, Annalisa, to begin with?
Yeah, well, you know, I kind of say there's a few different books depending on what angle you're looking at. So like Karen L. King, I think her book is called The Gospel of Mary Magdalene. If you really want to know about like the historical Mary Magdalene and you know, she talks about the Gospel of Mary and who Mary was as a spiritual leader and teacher and authority. I think that's a great book, and it's very academic, so that would be your academic study. I like to recommend as a beginner book, Margaret Starberg, even though a lot of her theories are not provable. She does have a lot of interesting theories. What is it, Woman with the Alabaster Jar? I also like Leloup's book. I forget his first name right now, but Lori brought his book up earlier. He did a translation and a commentary on the Gospel of Mary. So that's if you want to get like a really deeply spiritual perspective on the Gospel of Mary. I think those are the three that I use. Oh, I love Cynthia Berjolt's book too. She's a contemplative Christian mystic. But that kind of fits my own interests of, you know, Christian mysticism and kind of like bhakti worship. But there's so many. I mean, there's thousands of books. I mean, most of the women here that have spoke today have published books on Mary Magdalene. So I think that. What was the last book that you said, Cynthia? Someone? I'll type it into the chat. It's yeah, let me find the title and I'll type it into the chat in just a moment.
Can I just inform you as well, Krishna, Fitch and others, when we launched the Mary Magdalene Studies Association, for the first meeting, I produced a bibliography of Mary Magdalene Studies. I discovered that there wasn't a society, nobody had done it, there was no journal. And I researched every single book I could find in publication on Mary Magdalene, and I listed them all. So it's a sort of bibliographical study. I recommend that if you're just beginning, get that book. It's easy, you know, it's not expensive paperback. It lists all the books on Mary Magdalene, including fiction, channeled writings, historical stuff, theological, you know, you name it. And it's always to be updated. And I can send you the link. I'll put it, you know, I'll put my email in chat. You can contact me. That's also a good place to start, I think.
Yes.
And if anybody's really interested, I've also done a commentary on the Mary Magdalene Gospel myself, which is an audio book. You can't buy the book. I need a secretary to come and work for 2 years and type all my books out. They're audio books, right? But okay, Annalisa, we love you and thank you so much for helping. She's co-editing our journal. If any of the speakers who have spoken or about to want to send us a written text, we'll publish in next year's issue of the journal. And yes, that's the link to the Mary Magdalene bibliography. Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Right.
Thank you, everybody.
So, Annalisa, I think you're supposed to introduce me, aren't you? Because
are you next?
I'm next. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, you have such an illustrious career, lifetime career here. So Dr. Thomas runs the Mary Magdalene Studies Association for the past 5, 6, 7 years now. You're also, I hope you put it in here because I always forget the what the acronym stands for. Let me read your bio first. Okay. Druid-Christian philosopher, historian, teacher, author, peace studies expert, poet, and religious studies specialist. He was awarded his PhD from the University of London for a thesis which explores the history of the search for peace and which proposes a new field of historiography, transpersonal history, founder and academic director of the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. And you also work with the IIPSI, the International Institute for Peace Studies, right? And then also you had mentioned you're also a Druid, and you also said when we were speaking with Sophie that you run a poetry organization?
Yes, I do, yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. And today you'll be discussing the updates from the land of Mary Magdalene Studies.
Right, okay. Well, I was thinking a lot what I wanted to contribute to this meeting. And I decided the best thing I can do for you, because, you know, life is short, time is, who knows when we'll all meet again. I wanted to share with you a chapter of my own autobiography. I've written, as I go along, I've written volumes of autobiography just to keep track of all the work I'm doing, because life has been pretty frenetic. I started work in London to set up a Peace Studies Institute at the university, and that was an amazing, you know, complex and challenging role. And so I started keeping the autobiography there. I traveled to about 35 countries around the world, and I was also doing my PhD and meeting academics, scholars, mystics, druids, scientists, you name it. So I did it as a record of the work, right? I wasn't doing this work for my own personal interest, advancement. I believe London should be a voice for peace in the world, so should Britain. I've been very disappointed of late that they seem to have lost the plot. But then, anyway, I want to share with you a little slice of my life from 1999. And this involves something that I think you'll find very relevant and interesting. And it fits with quite a lot of what other people have said on this call. And the field of transpersonal history, which is history explored through psychology and spirituality, was inspired partly by this experience, right? Okay, I've been invited to a spiritual retreat center in Oklahoma called Sparrowhawk Village. The following day, June the 1st, 1999, I was destined to have an experience which would perhaps alter fundamentally how I saw the world and my own role and destiny within it. A teacher was visiting the Sparrowhawk Village and had been leading an intensive training course for 7 days, in which he'd been sharing techniques of past life regression with advanced students, many of whom were also training as ministers or counselors or spiritual healers in some capacity. I'd been volunteered to be a volunteer to be used for the training of one of these advanced students in question, who had already successfully trained as a minister, called Reverend Catherine Klimstock. The particular technique that was being used was called psychography, namely the study of the geography of the psyche. The session took place in the afternoon and was scheduled for the library. Sparrowhawk Village Library was a wonderful large building with a generous collection of books on all kinds of subjects, from conventional religious studies to the more esoteric and spiritual subjects. It housed the complete works of Alice Bailey, for example, and all of Blavatsky's work, as well as those of Torkom Saradarian, 1917 to 1999, an Armenian esotericist who'd worked with Bailey, then gone out alone, and had in turn been one of my host's teachers, Reverend Carol Parrish. It had been said of Torkom that as he grew up, he visited monasteries, ancient temples, mystery schools, in order to find the answers to the questions about the mystery of man and the universe. I naturally felt totally at peace in this environment, and had already spent some very happy hours studying away in there. Now I'd volunteered to be regressed to one of my past lives. I didn't really know what to expect, since I'd never had that done to me before. But I had certain intuitive ideas of my own, and had, ever since discovering Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga, ancient Greek philosophy, and Druidry in my late teens, all of which believed in reincarnation, become pretty much convinced that of all the theories as to what happens after death, it makes the most sense. There were too many cases of strange memories happening, and I knew enough about the scientific literature to feel that the case was at least strong enough to investigate open-mindedly and without prejudice. I believed that as an academic philosopher, it was my duty to retain an open-minded attitude to the question. And so I'd agreed to enroll for the session in a spirit of a free-thinking investigator, not knowing what would come up. At the very least, it would help Catherine on her own path of training. Detailed notes were taken of the experience, written down by Catherine, and what follows is a summary of them, and also from my own memories of the experience. Firstly, she generated in me a sense of profound peacefulness and stillness by asking me to lie down at full stretch on the library table, which had been turned into a meditation table by the addition of a comfortable futon covering and blankets and cushions for comfort and warmth, should I need them. In fact, it was a hot June summer day outside, and the temperature was balmy. She then took me through a basic physical stilling regime, in which each part of one's body is asked to be laid to rest and to be calmed, starting with the soles of one's feet, the toes, the calves, the knees, the thighs, the pelvis area, the genitals, the stomach, the chest, the throat, the arms, the nose, the tongue, the lips, the eyes, the scalp, and so on. Eventually, every part of one's body has been told it is safe to relax, to feel totally at peace. Then I was told to imagine myself lying on a cloud, high above the earth. I could feel deeply at peace, relaxing like in a dream. It was pleasant to lie there for what seemed like ages. I had no worries. I felt free and unbounded, almost formless. Next, I was instructed to start floating back down to planet Earth and to gently, ever so gently, feel myself falling back down to my beloved home planet. Down and down and down she took me until finally she said, "Now you land." And it's a soft landing. Look down at your feet. What do you see? What are they wearing? Expecting to see shoes, in fact, I could see that they were bare. My feet are bare, I told her, whispering, just loud enough for her to hear. I was both in a kind of light trance, seeing events in another place, another time, and also some part of me was still aware of the library and Catherine and Thomas's body lying here in deep peace. It was as if my mind was able to hover between two places at once. What was I doing? She asked. I was praying. I'd gone to the river to observe the dawn prayers. Which river was it? It was the River Nile. Who was I? I was a priest attached to a nearby temple. What did I do there? I was a teacher in charge of the temple's advanced teaching center. These facts emerged gradually as she took me through my memories, probing and asking gently for details. She would often say, "And now go forward in time. What is happening now?" Rather than repeat every exchange as they happen, let me summarize. It transpired that I was a spiritual teacher based at this particular temple, which had a school attached to it. a kind of advanced spiritual university. We had students who would come and study with us from all over Egypt, and indeed from overseas as well. We had students with us from the Indian world, from Greece, from all over the Mediterranean, some even from as far afield as Britain and Gaul, Druids in fact. What era is it, she asked, what epoch? It was late in the history of Egypt. It was in Hellenistic times, I said. There were even a few Romans about. In our school, we used Egyptian, Demotic, Greek, many languages. We studied them all. We had experts on them. We used the library at Alexandria, which was not too far away by boat. We used to borrow scrolls from there when we needed them. In fact, we had a close reciprocal arrangement with the museum there, and many of their advanced students came to us for spiritual retreats and initiations. She took me forward a few years. The work continued. Many students came and went. I was in charge of particularly the advanced esoteric teachings, which were given to candidates in their final graduation periods. To study with us took years. She asked me to go further in time, and then an issue came up. One of my students, a very advanced soul, had been very precocious and had worked his way through the advanced initiation grades in rapid succession. Now he was due to complete his training. He was expected to complete them all in 1 more year only. He came to me, however, and asked to be excused early. He wanted to go home and check on how things were going there in his homelands, which were in the eastern Mediterranean region. He would go there for a few months, he said, and if everything was all right, he would return as soon as he could to complete the final training. I was not convinced this course of action was the wisest. He still had what was arguably the most important of all the initiations to undergo, and its accompanying teachings, which concerned the mysteries of the goddess herself. Without that, a lot of what he'd received so far might only have the effect of puffing up his knowledge and pride. Once he had received the goddess teachings, then he would be grounded in indestructible humility and wisdom both, and he would achieve an adamantine state of being. He promised to return, however, and insisted he had to go and visit his homelands again, and so reluctantly I let him go. What happened next? I didn't hear anything for ages. Months passed by, all was silent. A year, 2 years. Then another student who'd also lived in that same region of the Eastern Mediterranean stated that he had passed close by and heard something of my student's work, that he'd now set himself up as a teacher in his own right and was conducting initiations of his own. I was puzzled. He lacked not so much the necessary authority to do that, as the necessary knowledge of the final stages of the work. He would be preparing candidates for something which could not be fully consummated, fully completed. He was going off, so to speak, at half cock. I was concerned. Why shouldn't he come back? Why not complete the training before starting out on his own? It was a mystery to me, a puzzle, but it was one that I could do little about. She progressed me forward in time again. What was happening now? Well, I'd heard other news from him. His teaching had begun to get the attention of the authorities, and he'd been arrested. He'd been tried on various trumped-up excuses and had been executed as if a common criminal, rather than a highly gifted and talented spiritual teacher and mystic. What did I think then when I heard the news? Upset, obviously, but not altogether surprised. Part of the problem of sharing information and divulging too many mysteries too quickly is that it does not allow time for the right people to sift themselves out in your presence. You need time to be able to ascertain the real weight of the group you will be working with. And this hadn't happened. He'd gathered around a group around him very swiftly, too swiftly, without really testing their credentials, without really estimating their own spiritual strengths and weaknesses. The whole mission, therefore, had been fraught with danger. Another problem is that without the final goddess initiations, one becomes inflated. One can think of oneself as some kind of great person or great infallible teacher, without realizing that in fact one is simply another child of the eternal goddess, the eternal mother, and that all we humans are in fact equal ontologically on that level, that we are all equal children of the one eternal mother, the divine source, the goddess. This vision of the highest possible basis for equality, that in fact it is our divinity that guarantees our equality, that was part of the vision that this highest initiation he had skipped afforded. Without that, one can sometimes tend to talk down to people. And if one does that, it is bound to get their goat, and they can become angry and offended. Better in such situations to say nothing. Not for nothing at Pythagoras, who'd also visited our teaching schools in Egypt, said many years previously, inculcating on his own disciples the ability to demonstrate the capacity to maintain a long period of silence regarding the mysteries which have been shown to one. What happened next? She asked. Well, I began to get other news. It trickled through from contacts, traders, students, sages. There were claims to have been sightings of my former student after his death. Some claimed he had been seen alive again. I tried to confirm this, to find an explanation. Some of his followers claimed he'd been involved in performing the resurrection mystery, that he had literally risen from death and come back into human life again. I suspended judgment. In my own teachings, I knew that this was not altogether impossible. It was part of a series of mysteries that were taught in our schools. We certainly knew the soul lives on after death. But to take a human body again, to take the same human body again, was something so rare that we had only the barest possible teachings concerning this. Was it possible, I wondered, that he had gone on to achieve a self-initiated mastery of the very highest mysteries, and that he'd been able to equip himself to undertake the most profound of all the mystical transformations? I wasn't sure. It just might have been possible. Certainly he was an advanced enough student, and with the right preparation and with the right configuration of circumstances, if anyone I know could have pulled this off, it could have been him. I received other reports. Yes, he had been seen. He had resurrected. More and more evidence was coming through to that effect in trickles and snatches. But I remained unconvinced and felt that here might be some wishful thinking going on in this tale, and that his followers had wanted him to resurrect so much they'd literally conjured him up out of their tortured imaginations. I wanted it to be true, but I wanted truth more than any particular angle on truth. So I remained open to the possibility, but I still lacked proof. And my own training did not allow me to give assent to something unless I'd seen or tested the actual evidence for myself. And what then? What happened as you grew older? She asked. I carried on with my teaching, consolidating a lifetime of work, I said. I had many more students. We conducted initiations, teachings, set tests. Some passed, some failed. To try again. Life continued. And about my former student, I remained in suspense. Then, towards the end of my life, a new and somewhat disturbing state of affairs developed. I heard that some of his followers, none of whom seemed to know about my actual existence, for I never heard from them, began to state categorically that not only had he resurrected, but furthermore, that unless one believed this, one was damned. That the whole world was now under judgment and was soon to be passing away into a new order of things, and only through faith in this man could one be saved from the coming judgment. With all due respect, I found these messages ridiculous and pompous in the extreme. Even if he had managed to achieve the once in a myriad of years resurrection mystery, it was hardly a reason to condemn the rest of mankind to eternal damnation, or to wish to see the world vanish and be destroyed. This was a perverse kind of thinking. How did you react? What did you feel? She asked. I felt upset, dismayed, I said. The tolerance and the gentleness which underlay the essence of our tradition was seemingly being swept away and replaced with a stronger, sterner, and more fanatical position. That there was only one truth and one truth only, represented by the teachings of this former student of mine, and that unless one turned to him invisibly in his resurrected state, the entire totality of all former teachings and wisdoms were as nothing as straw, as chaff blown in the wind. I was utterly appalled at the logic of this position as it began to filter through to us. This meant literally that all our temples, all our schools, all their teachings were as nothing and would pass away into dust to be replaced by a will-o'-the-wisp, a possibility, a hope, a faint chimera that such and such a one had managed to achieve the rare grace of the resurrection mystery. But how could such an achievement annul and replace the collected teachings of the whole of mankind's previous spiritual history? Obviously it couldn't, but that was what was being claimed. And at the end of your life, what happened? How did you die? I died without much peace and with a gnawing sense of disturbance, thinking that something fundamentally strange and terrible had happened to the spiritual fabric that binds mankind together to one family. I felt that the interconnectedness, the tolerance, the harmony that bounds all wisdom schools together throughout the known world into a bond of invisible unity was in danger of being shattered. That with this strange teaching bursting into the scene, there was a danger that it might be sundered forever. And these fanatical followers might well try and impose their own dogmas, their own half-truths, and pretend they were the only truths. Always a sign of less than broad minds, I said, when one proclaims that one's teaching is the only one. The very wisdom of the goddess teachings, which he had missed out on, taught one the antidote against this kind of arrogance. And I realized, as I was close to death, that it was this lacuna which was precisely the missing component of these new teachings, and which might otherwise have humored them and honed them and made them of good report, and might otherwise have made them serviceable for the well-being of many. As it was, they were half teachings. And then what? Now you've died. What happens next? As she said that, I found myself being buried in an underground tomb in half light from flickering torches, which then went out. And then I rose, my soul floated into another world, another zone of being. And I came before a kind of judgment hall, exactly as one might expect from an Egyptian eschatology. There were the gods waiting for me, and I had to give an account to them. In their midst was a goddess, Isis herself, seated on a throne, a beautiful woman wearing white, a garment that seemed made of pure light. I came before her and told her my fears. I spoke not in words, but telepathically. And I found myself crying with remorse, saying, I took the blame. I should have stopped him. I should have insisted he had his final teachings, and that he had left without being able to prevent it. And now that I feared that all our ancient wisdom schools would indeed be swept away in the name of these strange new teachings. Isis beckoned me closer to her and spoke from her heart directly to mine with words of comfort and healing. She told me that whilst it might seem to me at this time as if some disaster had happened, and as if something had indeed been lost, in fact, she had the power to turn it around into something good. That he and I had both acted blamelessly, that we'd both done what we had to do, that new ideas and new wisdom would result from these teachings, and that they could be turned gently to the service of the goddess and for the cause of truth and love and peace in the final end. She bid me be of good cheer to set my heart at rest, that I need not blame myself or take sorrow at the deeds of that life, that I'd played my part well, and that the teachings, incomplete as they were, would nevertheless add a certain nobility to the lives of many people, and that the example of selfless sacrifice and love shown by my former student would shine light for many people, even in the midst of great and hitherto inconsolable darkness. That in time, it would be seen that the bonds of wisdom teachings that bind all such schools everywhere had not been sundered, merely stretched and remolded and shaped anew to fit new conditions that were coming into the world. On hearing this, my heart grew peaceful and my grieving ended. I trusted her and could understand simply how things might yet work out for the best. After this account was ended, Catherine slowly brought me back to a place of calm and tranquility, and gradually brought me back into normal consciousness, and eventually slowly bade me sit up. We debriefed. She asked how I was feeling, and I was, of course, somewhat dumbfounded by what had transpired. She promised to write her notes out into an ordered form and gave them to me in a few days' time. After a few minutes, the others of us who'd all been undergoing a similar experience of past life regressions gathered downstairs for tea, when suddenly an alarm went up. A tornado warning had been issued, and a major tornado was expected soon to hit the village, which was nestling on a gentle mountain beside a great river near Tahlequah in Oklahoma, surrounded by forest. We all took shelter in a special bunker, and these tornadoes usually can't get inside them. And I meditated on the experience, hiding from the tornado. To be honest, of course I suspended judgment. Was this a true past life memory? It certainly felt as if it had been. I'd not consciously made this up. On the contrary, this whole narrative was something that had never occurred to me before in my waking consciousness. It was as if a whole life had suddenly been revealed to me, a whole complex sequence of events, and it rang true. It made sense of so much of what I do in my lifetime. It was as if my dual love of both paganism, Druidry, and the ancient mysteries, but also Christianity, my love for the church, and especially its esoteric mysteries, and my love for Islam and Sufism, and for Eastern religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, my love for esoteric Judaism, the Kabbalah, and my love for ancient Egyptian religions. I joined the Fellowship of Isis many years before in Ireland. They all suddenly made crystal clear sense to me. If this had indeed been my former life, it was as if I was still trying to right the wrongs, to reharmonize the imbalance. And above all, my love for the goddess teachings, my search at esoteric schools the world over for the wisdom of the divine feminine, that was all explained. Later, on the flight home back to the UK, after completing my own course, which I was teaching, the following week, which was on mediation and multi-faith conflict resolution, I was offered a paper on the flight home, an International Herald Tribune. And imagine my surprise when I read the following. A headline stated that in the past week, a momentous discovery had been made in Egypt. For the first ever time, a large underground necropolis had been discovered, dating from Hellenistic and Roman Egyptian times, in which many deceased individuals had been found in individual chambers, and they were described exactly as I'd seen in my past life regression. This synchronicity seemed to me to be some sort of further evidence from the gods that perhaps what I'd seen had indeed been in fact true. Right, that's the reading from my book. Now, I've never shared that before in any sort of public forum. One or two of my close friends, I've shared that story. I felt that you guys might benefit from it, enjoy it. It might, resonate with some of what you people have been researching and finding out. So I'm not going to say any more. That's if you've got questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. We've got a bit of time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thomas. I thought that was a really interesting share, given that you had shared with me recently that you had just read a commentary on the Divine Comedy. And I couldn't help but coming back to Beatrice and, the divine feminine or the feminine as guide through the worlds. So I wonder if you can speak to that, the importance of the feminine guiding you through this journey.
Yes, I mean, I just listened to the Divine Comedy in complete totality. It took a couple of weeks, in a commentary by a very interesting Anglican priest who's a minister and counselor. It's on Audible. I'd never read the whole thing before. I've never had time in my life. I've been too busy. And I didn't realize before I listened to the whole thing how important Beatrice is as a teacher in the book. She occupies the key role in the third book, which is Paradise. She's a girl that he'd met, a woman. And she becomes his philosophical teacher when Virgil leaves Dante at the gates of paradise. Beatrice takes over. Now, this was heretical. This is being written around the time of the Cathars. Dante was a very wise man, but he didn't want to challenge the church head on, or he would have been burned at the stake, like everyone was. He didn't want to go and join the Cathar resistance movement. That was stupid. So what he did is he smuggled into his poem the wisdom of the divine feminine by putting into Beatrice all the greatest philosophical teachings of the book. Now, I was listening to this and I thought, blimey, how did he get away with this? How on earth did they let the Divine Comedy ever become like an official book? It's like really important to the church. So that was very sneaky of Dante. And that, I think, is what Isis was saying to me at the end in that past life ago. She's saying, look, don't worry, we'll turn it to good. In a sense, that sort of male, I'm the Messiah, follow me kind of arrogant thing. That is what Crowley calls the kind of Osiris phase that mankind had to go through, that sort of male, look at me, I'm the best Messiah. No, I am, all that stuff. It then has to be harmonized and softened and smooth. And the divine feminine is the one that does that. So Beatrice is teaching Dante at that point. Right, anyway, any other questions or comments?
Wenke has a question. Do you want to ask it, Wenke?
Wenke, yes.
Oh, I see two other hands as well. So let's start with Wenke first.
All right. Hi, I'm still here. I've been listening to this all through the day. I'm just wondering, when you're describing your experience of being in that time frame and being disturbed by these new thoughts coming out and new ways of thinking, and then when you die, you're still carrying that disturbance with you. How do you feel about our time now, where we're in such an enormous paradigm shift, and where we're not really asking for a Messiah to come forth, but it's more like we are all growing the Christ consciousness within. So how does let's see, how can I put that? The memory or the thing that still sits in your cells about that memory, how does that mesh with what we're doing at the moment?
Well, thank you for that.
Makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Great question. I mean, I look at the war between Ukraine and Russia. I see Putin invoking Orthodox Christianity to send in his troops to destroy other Christians in Ukraine, largely. I mean, I know there's other religions in both countries, but that's a war of Orthodox or exoteric Christians. And unfortunately, Christianity got muddled up with nationalism and even a kind of racism. I mean, when Trump people march on the Capitol, some of them claim they're Christians, but they're sort of white, fanatical Christians, you know. So I think somewhere along the line, Christianity got hijacked by nationalism, imperialism, colonialism, and racism, which is, you know, that is, I mean, I'm a historian. That's what I did my, that is the tragedy of modern history. And it's still being fought out in the battlefields of Ukraine, and it's still being fought out in the courtrooms of America. The light that my former life sheds on all that is the antidote to all that. You know, if the goddess teachings, which are universal and transpersonal, they're not. I mean, every woman that is an embodiment of the goddess, and every man that is too is their servant in a sense, or their friend. Actually bring that universal love and humility. That's why I've spent, you know, my life as a peace philosopher. I coordinate philosophers of peace around the world. You know, but I do think there's a theological error being made, and unfortunately, you know, it was revealed to me in that past life experience, you know, where it came from. My interest and the reason I set up the Mary Magdalene thing is I'm interested in what happened after he left. Did this Mary? I mean, who was Mary Magdalene? I mean, that woman in that past life regression never asked me, did he have a girlfriend, or, you know, none of those kind of questions. Be really interesting had she done so. And was it possibly the case that after he left, he encountered this very spiritually charged woman who was able to take him through those goddess initiations in her own right, you know? I mean, who knows? So these are some of the mysteries that I'm still working on.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Go for it.
So you've been able to get through an audiobook of the Divine Comedy. I do include that in my own book just briefly, but what I would like to know from yourself, apparently Dante did not like Bernard de Clairvaux, who was one of the masterminds behind the Knights Templar. Bernard was a big proponent of Mariology, and I think Mary Magdalene. Do you know why Dante didn't like Bernard de Clairvaux? Do you have any insights on that as a result of having gone through the Divine Comedy?
Yeah, and also other things. I think Bernard of Clairvaux was a great fan of the Virgin Mary, but he wrote the Rule of the Knights Templars, and he was a man of faith, not of intellect. He was somebody that felt that spirituality is all about faith, belief, and he was a great warrior. And I know you're going to be talking to us later about the Knights Templars and all that. So this is very interesting. But what you see, my fan is Abelard. Now, Abelard was the intellectual Christian, Gnostic. Abelard wanted and was in touch with Sufis in Spain and Jewish Kabbalists. Abelard was looking for universal truth beyond religious boundaries.
Thank you. Okay.
And so what happened was Bernard had him declared a heretic. And Abelard had to take refuge at Cluny Monastery, not far from me in Burgundy, in order to escape. Now I'm with Abelard and Cluny, who were saying, no, we should study these teachings, these Muslim teachings. They translated the Quran for the first time into a European Latin, for instance. Whereas Bernard was saying, no, burn the books, let's go and kill them all, chop their heads off, you know, in the name of our faith. So, I mean, I'm just simplifying. And I think Dante was more on Abelard's side.
Okay. Okay, that helps.
What I got from that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate your courage in sharing this experience with us. That's always a very deeply personal thing to experience, and then yet again share it with a large group of people and on YouTube. Fascinating, epic experience. I can't think of a question to ask you on that other than to just say thank you. That was stunning. I have included quantum physics in my book and talked about reincarnation, and the name of the doctor escapes me, but he taught at the University of Arizona, had 2 PhDs, and ran the most comprehensive scientific study on reincarnation supposedly that's ever been done, and he almost lost his position as a result. But he incredible. I wish I could remember his name. I'm so sorry. But
Dr. Ian Stevenson was the founder of that field, really.
Splendid. Okay. I think I'm talking about a different individual, but I'm sure he worked with the individual you've just named. Right. But incredible study that had been done long time ago now. But
now I'm a member of the Galileo Commission with the Scientific and Medical Network, who are plugged into all the current reincarnation research stuff. And you see, what I did in my PhD thesis, I kind of smuggled it in like Dante to the heart of the historical profession in the UK, which is full of heavy historians like Toynbee and people that study world history and all that. I argued, and don't forget, I'd already had this past life regression by the time I did the doctorate. I was halfway through it, but I submitted 7 years after the thing. Obviously, I couldn't write about this in my PhD. I couldn't submit this as anything. But what I did do is say, maybe we should, as historians, have a new kind of methodology. Maybe people should take on board these kind of subjective experiences. Because I grew up in a world where there were one of the most dominant forms of history was Marxist historiography, which says only material events matter, only economics. The soul doesn't exist, there's no such thing. Behaviorists were trying to argue that we're just a collection of cells and bundles of impressions. And therefore there's no subjectivity to history. And religion is bunk, and Jesus was a schizophrenic. That's the official line of mainstream materialist history. And I said, no, that's not good enough. We need to have a historical profession that's sensitive enough to pick up on the traces of the past. Yes. And I'm very interested in things like psychic archaeology, people that can do tuning into objects, found objects, and see where they come from. There are psychics out there with those abilities. I'm a historian. I think we should investigate them scientifically, not debunk them from the outside. But I mean, for instance, my experience, well, look at it objectively. I can't prove it's true. It kind of sounds true-ish. But if one day, I mean, I haven't gone back into it very much. If one day somebody regressed me and said, okay, where, which temple, say you were at a temple, where is it? And let's say some archaeologists actually discovered it, plus a few scrolls. Well, then I would say, okay, now we've proved it from transpersonal and conventional history. So I'm somewhere in the middle. I want Abelard's rational world, but I also want the world of faith and spirituality. But I think faith and spirituality is so important, we should prove them. My name is Thomas. I want to actually prove it. Right? Okay. So look, we've got a little...
Can I say something to that, what you're just saying? Yeah. That in the studies that we're doing about Mary Magdalene, it seems like everybody have their own experience of her. And at large, we honor each other, whichever experience people have had with Mary Magdalene being close to them, being a sort of force inside them, being a recognition as an inside experience. We are all honoring that. Everybody seemed to have had something, but we all had different things. Not necessarily contrary, but different in the sense of I validate your experience and you validate mine, which is a brand new thing when it comes to presenting that in an academic world, to actually honor a very personal experience. And I think we're coming to that the subject is also just as valuable as what we think of as subjective. So I think we're coming to that.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I mean, they call it consciousness studies in scientific parlance. I mean, really, the whole mystery of consciousness is what.
Done a lot with the Transcendental Meditation movement, has done a lot of studies in consciousness.
Absolutely.
And that's been, I've been part of that.
Yeah.
Consciousness.
No, I've followed all that. Yeah.
Consciousness is compared to a grail that receives wisdom and energy and love from the divine. That's what consciousness is meant for. Our life existence is meant for love. There's nothing more to it than that. Everything else is secondary to love. And we all agree on that. And I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, Dr. Thomas, when you're finished, I would love to just sing a short little prayer just to close the energy here.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some more speakers, so it's not the end of the conference.
Okay.
But you're welcome to. We've got a sort of 10-minute gap for questions.
I can sing whenever you want me to.
Yeah, no, I think that would be lovely to do a song. And then we've got Dr. Megan Rose talking, who's joining us, and then Gretchen Cornwall as well. And then we're going to finish with a film. So there's a, but I think we could use this time for a song. That'd be great.
Okay, my honor.
Yeah.
Okay, so if everyone can turn off your microphones, just so that it doesn't get distorted. So just take a moment to become fully present. Connect to the love that we all are in this sacred circle. And together, let us lift the heaviness in the atmosphere. We are at a crucial time in history. We know this. Change is upon us. There's no escaping it. But what we can do is we can raise our energies up high through prayer, through some form of meditation where you connect the heart and the mind to the divine in any form, any worship that you like. So here we go. Take a nice big deep breath. Fill yourself up with Holy Spirit, which from Divine Mother comes into your lungs, filling you up with her light, with her grace, with her mercy. Breathe Holy Spirit into your essential being and drop all of your woes. Let go. Give it up to Divine Mother, who effortlessly takes them from you. Brightened and lightened in holy name, let us give praise. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. And just feel that worship wash over you with its healing power, its grace, to touch every part of you where you are holding wounds, pain, grief. Right now, in this moment, just take a moment and speak the names of every person that you know who might have need of prayer right now from all of us. So as you speak their names out loud, nobody else needs to hear it, just between you and God. So just speak some names and we'll send them good vibrations, and we'll ask that God's love reaches into the darkest of places to help lift people when they feel hopeless. So let's pray for that. Amen. 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 Thank you very much for allowing me to do that with all of you.
Thank you very much, Krishna.